The megalithic structures found at many sites around the world have generated endless controversy as to how they were built. Conventional archaeologists, who dismiss the possibility of highly advanced civilizations in the remote past, insist that they were built solely with the use of primitive tools and brute force. Some of the structures, or parts of them, could have been built in this way. However, a number of engineers have stated that some features would be difficult, if not impossible, to duplicate today, even using the most advanced technology. The sheer weight and size of some of the stone blocks have prompted several researchers to wonder whether the ancient builders had mastered some form of levitation technology. Behind each structure you're about to see, from Japan to Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue that has puzzled even the best scientists. Asuka is a village nestled among the hills of the Nara prefecture of Kansai, Japan. The area is known for its many Buddhist temples, shrines, and statuary, but there are unusually shaped granite stones and stone-carved figures that still defy explanation. Apart from the Shimuzen Seki, a garden fixture carved to suggest Mount Sumeru of Buddhist mythology, or the male-female stone carving which likewise was designed as a fountain, the purposes originally associated with the other worked stones, bearing such names as Masuda no Iwafune, Sakafune Ishi, Kame Ishi, Miroku Ishi, Nimen Seki, etc., is unknown and does not fit with Buddhist-style sculpture or construction. They have been, for the most part, ignored by academics. Let's focus on the largest of those monuments. It's known as Masuda no Iwafune, which is said to mean rock ship of Masuda. The monument is 11 meters long, 8 meters wide, and 4.7 meters high, and weighs approximately 1,000 tons, carved from a single piece of granite. The upper surface is flat with a shallow trough and 2 square holes. At the base of the stone, there are protruding notches that are believed to be related to the process used by the builders to flatten the sides of the rock. It sits atop the steep incline of a hill near Okadera Station. Some believe the shape and contour of the rock is very compelling evidence for past alien encounters. In fact, most ancient astronaut researchers in the area believe Masuda no Afune is a replica of a godlike vehicle. Other researchers have speculated that it could be a piece of evidence that shows signs of an advanced technology in the past because of the skill involved in making it. Obviously, it's an incredibly advanced construction for its time. Another remarkable fact is that the granite rock from which the megaliths were created is incredibly hard. Even with modern equipment, it's very difficult to even apply a scratch to the surface. Locals believe in the magical powers of megaliths and try to avoid them, and many more will not touch the stones. Today, these stones still represent one of the greatest archaeological puzzles of Japan, because no archaeologist can state with certainty how old the Masuda no Wafune really is, or what its original function might have been. There are many more of these enigmatic features of ancient Japan that are, as of now, lost to the pages of history. Seiwite is an archaeological site 47 kilometers east of the city of Abancay, about 3 hours away from the city of Cusco, in the province of Abancay, in the region of Apurimac in Peru. To some historians, the site is regarded as a center of religious worship for Inca people. But beyond the ruins of the Inca temple are mysterious automobile-sized stones, which have clearly been shaped with an unknown technology. Whoever created the massive stones is another massive mystery. Although it's thought that the place was an Inca sanctuary, archaeologists are not sure the ancient Incans were the constructors. The stone is made of andesite, which is as hard as granite, and the Inca had at best bronze tools or meteorite iron hammers. This is why much doubt has been cast on the origins of the monuments and their archaeological site of Seiwite. This intricate stone block is adorned with more than 200 zoomorphic and geometric figures, which together compose something like a 3D relief. The entire rock itself is even formed in the shape of a feline head. It's said to have been transported to the hill since it's not a natural outcrop. Some carvings represent geographical figures and human constructions, while making use of certain shapes natural to the rock formation. The top of the stone is completely resurfaced with complex designs with many resembling streets, stairways, channels, and buildings. Perhaps the stone carving represents a map of a lost city, or, as some theories suggest, it may be a depiction of the universe itself. Researcher Dr. Arlen Andrews Sr. believes the monolith was used as a scale model to design, develop, test, and document the water flow for public water projects, and to teach ancient engineers and technicians the concepts and practices required. While the precise meaning of this stone remains unsolved, the monolith is part of the material culture of the Incan people, and as such helps archaeologists piece together how and why they lived this way. Understanding the Incan culture from an archaeological perspective helps archaeologists apply this knowledge to similar civilizations and find links between ancient cultures. In any case, however, the Say-White monolith remains an intriguing mystery, and no doubt people will continue to speculate about it, from its creators to its function, for years to come. Intihuatana stone is a sacred ritual stone for the Incas, which has four sides considered as the four cardinal points: north, south, east, and west. The most famous Intihuatana stone is located at the archaeological site of Machu Picchu, which is located on top of the sacred mountain. This is a simple wonder reflecting the perfection of ancient technology. This wonderful sculpture, to put it one way, had of course more functions than being a beautiful decorative piece, which it surely is. The stone's name is translated into English as the hitching post of the sun, because the Incas believed that the stone can hold the sun in its place along its annual path in the sky. The sun almost stands at the pillars at midday on March 21st and September 21st, when the equinoxes occur. Daytime equals nighttime. Then no shadow is cast at all. The monolithic structure, carved in gray granite, up to 2 meters high and 2 meters in diameter. Its base does not have a defined shape, but at the top stands out an upright stone column. In addition, it features a granite block resembling a bench. However, who actually made this is again open to question. Brienne Forster states, "The lack of tool marks on the surfaces may indicate that the work done to make these enigmas was long before Inca times, possibly by a culture called the Parehouse or Viracochas. Viracocha is the name or title in the Quechua language of the Inca creator god at the time of the Spanish conquest of Peru in the 16th century. According to Inca beliefs, Viracocha made earth and sky, then fashioned from stone a race of giants. Displeased with them, he turned some giants back into stone and destroyed the rest in a flood. It's often said that the Intihuatana stone serves as a portal to another world. These stones were extremely sacred to the Incas. Peruvian shamans claimed, and still claim, that if a sensitive person touches their forehead to the stone, it would open their vision to the spirit world. During their conquest, the Spaniards specifically sought out and destroyed many Intihuatana stones. The Incans believed that when an Intihuatana stone was broken, the deities pertaining to that sacred spot would die. Many mysteries are written around the stone. They tie the sun because if the sun goes out, his life will be finished, and the sun brings to life all creatures, is the light of the life. Back to Japan now. 100 kilometers west of Asuka Park, near Takasago, there is mysterious object standing beside the rock massif. Ishi no Hoden is a monolith, semi-finished product. In other words, a block that's remained in place since its production and which has clear signs that it has not yet been fully completed. It's estimated to be at least 1,500 years old. The temple is built precisely near the megalith because it's believed holy and people have venerated it since ancient times. The official version is that the rock was meant to be a tomb, but there's no scientific information as to who built it nor what its true purpose is. The mysterious cube monument is dug out of the surrounding rock, similar to the rock churches in Ethiopia. The makers skillfully positioned the stone to appear as if it's actually hovering above the pool of water it stands in, with the overall structure being situated in an old quarry. It's known as one of the greatest enigmas of Japan's ancient history, and is now worshipped as the god of Ashiko Jinja Shinto shrine. Although the structure of the top is concealed by pine trees, it's thought that there may be two holes like Masada no Iwafune and Kengo Shizuka Kofun. Some say that it's supposed to show a skyship with a long-gone people coming down from heaven. The stone is 5.6 meters high, 6.5 meters wide, and 7.5 meters deep, with a weight of 500 tons. This makes the stone larger than any of the stones used in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest of which was 80 tons, while the typical large base stones of that pyramid were 6 to 10 tons. There are no regular traces or drills or chisels on Ishi no Hoden. This surface character again raises questions about a certain type of mechanical tool that does not spoil, but simply crushes or grinds the material. Even seeing the difference between the surfaces of Masudu Iwafune and Ishi no Hoden, it's quite possible that the same tool was used when machining both objects. The stone monument was built from hyalocastite stone, which is a volcanic rock consisting of glassy large pieces contained in a fine-grained matrix dominated by glassy shards or smaller pieces. Something like this might lead us to speculate on a melting process with high technologies. Because of the enormous size alone, it's safe to assume that it was built by a technologically developed civilization, and with its overwhelming presence and its mystique, it continues to fascinate people even today. There are many strange sights in the Arabian Peninsula that might puzzle even the most well-traveled researcher. One of them is Al Nasla Rock Formation. This rock is split through the middle by a clean and straight crack, which looks almost as if the rock was sliced with a laser. It's located in Tema Oasis, Saudi Arabia. Archaeologists have also discovered cuneiform inscriptions which are possibly dating from the 6th century BCE at the oasis city. They show Al Nasla was a major trade route in antiquity and was once the dwelling place of a Babylonian king, Nabonidus. It's referenced in both Assyrian and biblical sources as a trading post and is also known for abundant rock art made as much as 4,000 years ago. Just imagine walking around in the desert, exploring the unknown, and you come across a massive standing stone split in half by a perfect line. What would be the first thing that jumps to your mind? The rock was discovered in 1833 by Charles Huver, and it's been at the heart of many theories and controversy since then. There have been numerous speculations to ascertain the reason and the method of the cut. However, the mystery of this megalith is still as shrouded as it was at the time of its discovery. One of the vertical fields is flat, almost like it's been cut by a modern device. Could it have been worked on at some point with some sort of precise ancient tool? Taking a closer look at this stone of Al Nasla, you cannot help but wonder what its true purpose was. Is the split in the rock really a result of the forces of nature, as some experts suggest? Or is it possible that just as there are many other ancient places on Earth, dating back thousands of years, featuring precision cuts, this stone too was crafted by an unknown technology? Uniquely, in each of the lower parts of the Al Nasla stone, it looks like a buffer has formed by rocks that are much smaller or similar to a shock absorber, which prevents it from touching the ground. This has made archaeologists shake their heads in puzzlement, and many continue to try to solve the mystery to this day. Today, this part of the Saudi Arabian desert is still under investigation for archaeological remains. Of course, the last question we should ask is, how long the rocks will remain balanced? Before the advent of Islam, Afghanistan was an important center of Buddhist teaching. To find remnants of this Buddhist past, one has to search extremely thoroughly. The once rich excavation sites have turned to rubble after decades of neglect. One of these remnants and lesser-known curiosities of Afghanistan is the Takht-e-Rustam Monument in Samangan Province, between Mazar-e-Sharif and Kunduz in the north. This stupa was named after Rustam III, the Persian ruler of the Bavan dynasty. Unlike others, this stupa has not been mounted above ground, but it's been carved into the ground in a style that, again, resembles the monolithic churches of Ethiopia. The dome-shaped structure of the highly polished limestone, 8 meters high and 28 meters across, is encircled by a 2-meter wide passageway at its foot, which was used by pilgrims for circumambulation. Historicity of the town is dated to the Kushan dynasty reign during the 4th and 5th centuries. It represents the earliest link to the evolution of Buddhist architecture in Afghanistan. The monastery of the major Buddhist tradition, the Theravada Buddhism, has 5 chambers. 2 are sanctuaries and 1 is a domed ceiling with an intricate lotus leaf beautification. There are several caves at the base of the stupa. Above one of the caves, there's a square building with 2 conference halls. One is 22 meters square and the other is circular. In one of these caves, archaeological excavations have revealed a cache of Ghaznavid coins. One must ask, how could Buddhists have built this strange and mysterious building? But if you do, you probably won't find an answer. There are very few records of how this place was constructed or how long it took to make. Historians have proposed 2 possible reasons why the stupa has been carved in the ground instead of being built above the ground. One explanation is that it could have been done for the purpose of camouflage to protect the monastery from invaders. Another much more mundane explanation states that it's simply been done to escape the excessive hot and cold climate extremes of Afghanistan. Some ancient astronaut researchers suggest that it can have connection to mysterious flying ships that visited Earth 6,000 years ago, according to ancient Vedic texts. They say stupas design-wise are much like flying ships, vimanas, seen around the world. Is it possible that an ancient flying machine, reportedly discovered in a cave in Afghanistan in 2012, could be one of these ancient flying vehicles? Quirigua is a remarkable place. It's located in the southeastern border of the Maya lowlands in Guatemala. What makes this place remarkable is the stelae and zoomorphs discovered by explorers John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood, who were the first to record and document the site in 1840. These intricate works of stone are the latest and best preserved of the Mayan world. Originally, Quirigua was under the rule of the dynasty of the city of Copan, now Honduras. But in 738 AD, the Quirigua dynasty managed to become independent and even subjugate the Copan dynasty. And that's when the city reached its peak. Most of the monumental constructions and the Acropolis, as well as the stelae, were erected during the following 60 years of reign of the new Quirigua dynasty, a dynasty that dominated the region of the Copan River and the Matagua River. These monoliths were carved out of sandstone by Mayan stonemasons who had no access to metal tools, which is an amazing feat. It's even more so when one considers the intricate designs that cover them. Zoomorph P is the largest of the Zoomorpho at Quirigua, and according to some, it's the greatest Mesoamerican monument ever discovered. Weighing over 20 tons, it stands 2 meters tall, measures 3.5 meters wide, and 3 meters long. It provides a surface area of about 402 meters, or 1,314 feet, and every square centimeter is engraved with information. You'll see Zoomorph P marries two key principles. Firstly, the king rests in the jaws of a mythical beast. Secondly, he holds the mannequin scepter and shield, which is shown on many of the stelae. One interpretation of this scene is that it's meant to be a reenactment of the creation of man. Explorer Maudslay nicknamed it the Great Turtle. It weighs around 20 tons. The design of the zoomorph is incredibly intricate, and the whole monument is covered with skillfully executed sculpture. It's located in the Ball Court Plaza, just south of the Ball Court. Zoomorph P is accompanied by an altar depicting an unidentified deity leaping from a split in the earth. A hieroglyph text on the zoomorph describes the founding of Quirigua under the supervision of the King of Copan. Traces of red pigment have been found on this monument, suggesting that it was originally painted red. John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood's books on Quirigua makes for some fascinating reading. After they discovered the place, they were followed by Alfred Maudslay in the 1880s and 90s, who documented the site through his excellent photographic methods. Sylvanus Morley started systematic excavations in the early 1900s. Excavation and consolidation continued in the 1970s and 80s. Pumapunku is part of a wider temple complex found in the ancient city of Tiahuanacu in western Bolivia. Both are viewed as the most mysterious archaeological sites in all of South America. Situated 3,800 meters above sea level, Tiahuanacu predates the ancient Inca civilization of pre-Columbian South America. There's no written record of the ancient city prior to Inca settlement, with the Incas believing to be a holy site where their deity of creation, Viracocha, started life, with the various ethnicities of human being created here before moving out into the wider world. Pumapunku, the door of the Puma, is one of many examples of the incredible masonry work found throughout Tiahuanacu. It and many other structures were created with startling precision that predates the technology and methods available at the time, with doorways, stone blocks, smoothly drilled holes, an irrigation system, and other complex examples of stonework found throughout the site. The blocks used to create perfectly interlock and look like they were manufactured using modern machinery. A huge stone terrace and walls would feature massive blocks that interlock with each other with the finest precision. They form load-bearing joints, and no mortar was used when building the site. The precision needed to make these cuts into huge stone blocks has given birth to many theories about the origins of Pumapunku and Tiahuanacu. Many theorize that an advanced ancient civilization predating the Incas were responsible and had technologies well beyond a civilization for a much later period. We know Incas didn't have the capabilities to pull off such feats of engineering. How could a civilization that predates them by hundreds of years do so? According to engineers, one of the largest single stones ever to be moved and put into building anywhere on Earth, about 400 tons, was transported to Tiahuanaco from a quarry over 200 miles away. This feat is more incredible when one realizes the route of transport was through a mountain range up to 15,000 feet. They've amazed countless travelers, such as the Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, who observed that some of these stones are very worn and washed, and there are others so large that one wonders how human hands could have brought them to where they now stand. When one considers the work, I cannot understand or fathom what kind of instruments or tools were used to work them, for it's evident that before these huge stones were dressed and brought to perfection, they must have been much larger to have been left as we see them. I would say that I consider this the oldest antiquity in all of Peru. Other stones at Pumapunku contain inexplicable grooves and niches. Some researchers have speculated they may have used metal clamps. To create these clamps, the construction workers would have had to deploy a portable furnace to pour the molten liquid metal into the grooves. Any delay could solidify the metal defeating the purpose of melting it. Therefore, evidently, the constructors of Pumapunku not only were well versed with the science of metal making, but also they were advanced enough that they could create a portable furnace device to achieve the technique of clamping. Here we see stone pillars with meticulously carved grooves in them. The precision and accuracy with which these grooves have been created is incredible given the time. What's more remarkable is that they show signs of tooling and machining. It's been speculated that only diamond-tipped tools could have cut through the unforgiving diorite. However, that subject also has much debate. How such massive stone blocks were carried to the site is a topic of debate, and whilst giants seems to be a wilder theory, it's certainly one that carries some weight when considering how the creators of this place managed to move these huge blocks. This would involve carrying stone blocks weighing several dozen tons, many miles, and up a steep mountain incline. The mainstream theory is that a labor force from the ancient settlers of Tiahuanaco completed the task, but what techniques they could have used remains hotly disputed given the complex route to the site. The largest stone blocks used in Pumapunku are around 7.8 meters long, 5 meters wide, and roughly a meter thick, with an average weight estimated to be 131 tons. The site is 2 miles above sea level. There's no evidence of the wheel in Tiahuanacan culture, and there are no trees in the area to use as rollers. The feat of moving the stones for 10 miles, let alone 90, would be an incredible achievement. Interestingly, the age of the site has also been hotly debated over the years. After its original discovery by explorer Arthur Poznański, the site was dated to around 15,000 BC. He based this finding on the astronomical alignment of the main temple, which acts as a sort of sundial based on the sun's positioning. During his time there, the sunrise didn't follow the alignment of the temple's cornerstone as expected, leading him to calculate that the sunrise would follow the proper alignment 17,000 years prior. However, modern radiocarbon dating places it as much more recent construction, sometime around AD 600, although many cite these findings as inaccurate and unreliable. Tiahuanaco seems to have faced a sudden, catastrophic end. In the layers of rock that date to the same time, now extinct species of plants and animals can be found mixed in with human skeletal remains. Everything seems to be jumbled together, as if a tidal wave or some other event caused major changes on the Earth's surface, including the life that inhabited it. This gives credence to the theory that a global flood, found throughout mythology, did occur. Ollantaytambo is a town found 72 kilometers from the city of Cusco, Peru, that is a prominent archaeological site with some incredible megalithic structures. Situated 2,792 meters above sea level, it's the starting point of the historical Sacred Valley, a prominent tourist route that leads to Peru's famous Inca archaeological sites, including Machu Picchu, Pisac, Chinchero, and Ollantaytambo itself. This ancient marvel of engineering is believed to have been built around 1440 AD by Inca Emperor Pachacuti. However, many researchers believe that this ancient site dates back much further in time than we can imagine. There are many noteworthy structures in Ollantaytambo, including the Temple Hill. Made from huge stone blocks that weigh some 50 tons, the heaviest are thought to weigh as much as 150 tons. They were placed with such precision using a cut and fit method that no mortar was needed, a common fixture of architecture in Peru. Modern technology can't even lift some of the stones, let alone position them such that a human hair cannot fit through. Clearly, the techniques used to produce these features has been lost to modern science. Yet it's evident of how advanced ancient peoples were. Soft stones could also explain the precision fit. The stones would settle by their own weight and the weight of the ones on top, thereby squeezing into any gaps. The protrusions could be formed by making marks in the support structure that would be necessary to prevent uncontrolled movement of the material at the outer face of the wall. Amazingly, the stones used for this megalithic structure are thought to be quarried from a mountaintop quarry about 7 miles from Ollantaytambo. This means that the stones would need to be lowered down a steep portion of the mountain or transported over River Canyon with near vertical rock walls. This method would then require the blocks to be lifted back up another portion of the mountain to the site of the town. Given the technological limitations of the time, a remarkable achievement if true. Advocates of such push and shove technique point out that the remains of a ramp do exist, leading up to the hillside, and that furthermore numerous stones, the so-called tired stones, which never made it to the top, can be seen lying at the foot of the ramp. Unfortunately, this evidence only explains the stones that did not get up to the ramp. It tells us nothing about the stones which we see at the top of the hill. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the megalithic structures already existed in Inca times, and that the ramp and tired stones represent the efforts of the Incas to emulate what they saw. How is it possible that the massive stone walls display fascinating similarities to ancient walls found halfway around the globe in Egypt? Does this mean that ancient cultures shared the same building techniques? Does this mean that ancient cultures around the globe had access to some sort of advanced ancient technology that's been lost since then? The Wall of the Six Monoliths is the main highlight of the Temple Hill area, which is an unfinished building made from 6 massive stone blocks. It's one of the most iconic and baffling pieces of architecture yet to be discovered. Standing approximately 36 feet wide and 14 feet high, the wall is one of the great mysteries of the Andes. It consists of 6 massive andesite monoliths, which are curiously divided by small strips, which seem to serve little purpose other than to add a modern riveted steel effect to this ancient wall. The rocks are all masterfully crafted to leave not even a paper-thin crack between them. We can easily see where they were carved from the rock face on the other side of the valley. Several questions arise from even a cursory examination, though. The cut marks are perfectly square. You would think that the stone would be knocked out of the rock face and then squared. That's how modern stone cutters would do it. Not so here. It almost looks as if the rock was scraped off the mountain face. Secondly, the surface of the cuts is glassy smooth, not rough the way you'd expect sawn or chiseled surfaces to be. Also, why did they cut the rocks from a place that are sometimes up to 130 feet above the floor of the valley? It would be akin to taking an incredibly difficult job and making it 100 times harder just for the fun of it. There is one interesting theory, and that is levitation. Unfortunately, science has still not been able to figure out how to levitate large, heavier objects. Yet, history suggests the ancient civilizations might have already cracked this secret in their building of the pyramids and other megalithic monuments. Did they have some advanced form of sound levitation to move 1,000-ton stones? A task that present-day builders admit would be difficult even with the use of modern cranes. Another interesting find lay on the bottom from where these rocks were cut out of. We find strange but precise crisscross patterns. The pattern that we see appears to be a trace left by some kind of machinery that was left behind at the time these slabs were being removed. Possibly these marks could have been created by some kind of laser or saw machine. So yes, this could be one of the most clear pieces of evidence that the ancients did in fact use some sort of advanced technology at the time they were cutting, removing, and shaping these incredible rocks. There are also several unused stone blocks scattered around the area that show most of the Temple Hill center was incomplete when the town was abandoned. Other blocks look to have been removed from the walls in the area too, suggesting that a major reconstruction project may have begun at some point. Further afield from the town are several storehouses built for the farmers working along the winding terraces that surround Ollantaytambo. There's also a road that the Incas built that connected Ollantaytambo to Machu Picchu and Pisac, which is used today for the many tourists trekking through Peru's most famous Inca sites. Is this evidence of an advanced, now lost worldwide civilization that spread throughout the world and allowed its mystery builders to cut with laser-like precision, intricately carve and transport massive rocks weighing over hundreds of tons in weight? Is this evidence of an ancient alien civilization that came to Earth many thousands of years ago and helped mankind evolve? Or is it simply the ingenuity of mankind? Ancient advanced stonework and extreme machining in ancient Egypt. The purpose in presenting the notion of ancient advanced extreme machining in ancient Egyptian culture is simple. They had such a sophisticated stone technology beyond our own. The evidence presented here will leave you absolutely baffled beyond belief. There are so many numerous examples, we can only hope this scientific process in uncovering the work of the engineering geniuses becomes enhanced. However, Egyptology is no fan of attributing any advanced skills to the ancient master masons. They still sell us this method to achieve advanced results like this. The tides of injustice are slowly turning as global tourism and sophisticated cameras are commonplace now. We have hard evidence of pre-dynastic stone-turning possible lathe work, tubular drilling at advanced speeds, marks left behind by what can only be perceived as use of circular stone saws, mechanical methods of engraving lines in hard stones as far back as the 4th dynasty, ancient machining techniques comparable to today's CNC routing, except done in hard pink granites. The ancient Egypt masons shaped all kinds of stone with intricate mastery. They were adept with the use of a wide variety of manufacturing tools, various building stones, tube drills capable of hard material, straight cutting saws, circular cutting saws, lathes, and smoothing techniques for polishing. It's the marks left in the stone by these multitude of tools which are the reliable source of evidence of advanced extreme machining in the ancient world. There are no surviving examples of the tools utilized. There are no written or pictorial records discovered which mention or describe their use. After all, we barely do this today. Why should they in ancient times? There's serious debate about the nature of the tools and their advanced techniques in the historical framework. The marks left in stone are a beacon of curiosity and intrigue to engineers who work these materials today. Egyptology couldn't care less how they did anything unless they feel the need to show some guy pounding a rock and solve the enigmas of all Egyptian building work in an instant. Modern experts are baffled with their machining techniques, and it's these individuals we must listen to if we want to answer conclusively the key questions. What were the cutting tool tips made of? What was their abrasive? How were the tools manufactured? What machinery was used to control the cutting surface on the stone? How did they apply the tool pressure? Why were their tolerance standards of precision so high? Engineers and architects are completely puzzled and rigorously debate pointing to monuments and artifacts, though no scientific proof exists for any of their theories unless the tools are present. Look at an ocean cruiser. It doesn't take a sophisticated debate to know tools, industry, and manufacturing of a high level was used to create it. Why does Egyptology portray such ignorance on the issue then? Because the revelations bear directly on the developmental history and subsequent chronology of the pre-dynastic Egyptian cultures, followed by the early dynastic period. Ancient housewares discovered by Flinders Petrie show undeniable proof of being turned on a lathe. There are various examples in the Cairo Museum, the Petrie Museum in UCL London, and various other museums around the world. Some of the best examples of stoneware were discovered around the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Petrie also discovered pieces of interesting stoneware on the Giza Plateau. There are incredible aspects about these vases, plates, and bowls that speak of highly advanced engineering techniques. They portray the distinctive tool marks belonging to lathe-manufactured items. This is easily visible in the center of the bowls or plates, where the angle of the cut changes rapidly. The stoneware in question is left with a very clean, narrow, and almost perfectly circular line made, a clear indication of the tip of the cutting tool. These stoneware masterpieces, comprising of dishes, platters, are some of the finest ever found, and they're right there from the earliest period of ancient Egyptian civilization. They're made from a variety of materials. Seemingly, the choice of material to be cut was irrelevant, as they went from soft alabaster all the way up the hardness scale to extremely hard granite. Working with alabaster is relatively easy, at least compared to granite. Alabaster can be worked with primitive abrasives and tools. The sophisticated workings in granite are an entirely different matter and indicate a level of skill we're not aware of today and can only be considered advanced technology. Flinders Petrie was quoted on this issue saying, "The lathe appears to have been as familiar an instrument in the 4th dynasty as it is in the modern workshops." Stonework as sophisticated as these examples are not found in any later era, leaving many to think the skill was lost or that they were heirlooms from a different epoch or culture. There's also the case of delicate vases being made of very brittle schist, somewhat like a flint, and yet they're polished, finished, and turned to flawless thin edges, an incredible feat of engineering and craftsmanship. Many bowls are turned and hollowed out with thin necks and have a symmetrical wall thickness without any noticeable errors. Let us not understate that these items were made by an ancient machinist. To produce this in clay would be outstanding. To see it in granite is simply incredible. There are many pieces turned out of granite, porphyry, or basalt, all fully hollowed with decorative narrow undercut openings. The most remarkable of these have long necks. The fact remains we cannot replicate these artifacts today with techniques, crafts, or machinery. But before we feel any ineptitude of craftsmanship, Egyptology comes to the rescue with copper chisels and stone pounders. The tri-lobed schist disc of Sabu is a complete mystery and masterpiece. Some 24 inches in diameter, bizarre structure with extremely thin pieces turned out of schist. The large plate has a central hub some 3 inches in diameter. The outside rim, which in 3 areas spaced evenly around the perimeter, is flared towards the central hub. If there was ever a case for advanced ancient stoneworking, this is it. It's made from a very fragile material called metasiltstone. Bending this material without fracturing it would be hard even for modern technology. According to some scientists, the Sabu disc raises important questions about our view of history. What was the purpose of this mysterious disc? Why on earth would ancient Egyptians create such an intricate object? 5,000 years ago, people were not supposed to possess the necessary tools to work material like this. Why would ancient Egyptians go to all this effort to create the disc if it didn't have a specific purpose? The Sabu disc is the subject of wild speculations as a result from everything involving rotating energy to acoustic knowledge. There were not just a few of these stoneware items. Apparently there were thousands discovered around the Step Pyramid. The Step Pyramid is considered the oldest stone pyramid in Egypt. Although Petrie found some fragments of similar bowls at Giza, the majority have been found at the Step Pyramid, at least in quantity. Many of them have inscribed, actually scratched onto them, the symbols of the very earliest kings of Egypt from the time before the pharaohs. The primitive skill of the inscriptions provokes many to think those were not made by the same craftsmen who created the bowls in the first place. Perhaps they were added later by those who acquired them as heirlooms. Is highly plausible. Who made these objects? Why? How? Where? And when? What happened to the master craftsmen? The advanced tubular drilling techniques. W.M. Flinders Petrie is by far an essential reading source on anything to do with tubular drilling in ancient Egypt. After all, he picked up the pieces, the drill cores, and the fragments that nobody else seen the value in. In 1883, he wrote the following words: "These tubular drills vary in thickness from 1/4 inch to 5 inches in diameter, and from 1/30 to 1/5 inch thick. The smallest hole yet found in granite is 2-inch diameter. There is a still larger example where a platform of limestone rock has been dressed down by cutting it away with tube drills about 18 inches in diameter. The circular grooves occasionally intersecting prove that it was done merely to remove the rock. Tube drilling was commonplace in Egypt, a wonderful pristine example of which is displayed in the Cairo Museum, with zero information or provenance. Clearly, the spiral grooves are visible. Not only are the spiral grooves of regular depth, but equally spaced all over the specimen. Where the cores overlap, the consistency is perfect. This can only be attained by jeweled points set into drills, which was Petrie's conclusion over 100 years ago. The enigma has raged since then. The most famous example of tube drilling by the ancient builders is the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. A tube drill mark was left on the top inside of the box with some extra polishing to cover it up. If you go to the King's Chamber, you can still see it if you examine the box. Looking at the radius of the cut in the King's Chamber box, less than 2 inches, it's rather obvious that in this one piece alone, the masons made thousands of holes several inches deep. The experts who did this had mastered completely the principles of drilling in any material, soft or hard, wood, stone, or metal, and could have drilled virtually any naturally occurring material on this planet. Things get interesting when we find holes drilled in granite, and we even have some of the drill core remnants. This can be seen in the overhead door lintels of the granite-lined Valley Temple near the Sphinx. And at Abu Gharaib, most of the doorways in the temple still show evidence of tube drilling one way or another. Perhaps the holes were used to place long vertical rotating shafts on which the doors were hung, somewhat like hinges. There's a primitive version of tube drilling that can be achieved with a bamboo drill bit, a bow saw, and sand. However, achieving this method in granite is certainly not easy by any standards. Tube drilling is a highly specialized method that just wouldn't develop without the need for a large hole. These holes are the evidence of a highly advanced technology, and certainly not developed for just this one purpose, but for many easier purposes. Generations of development over many projects, over hundreds of years. When you get this far in the psychology of our ancient builders, you further realize none of this happened without mining and metallurgy. Bit manufacturing, generations of experience with grinding materials, rotational manufacturing techniques, the wheel and all that goes with it. What was the dedication or motivation for this developmental procedure? And is there an archaeological record in pre-dynastic and Old Kingdom Egypt pertaining to advanced ancient stone-cutting techniques? Black basalt saw marks on the Giza Plateau and the King's Chamber. There are black basalt paving stones on the east side of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Most people walk over them, never realizing them, probably busy looking up at the Great Pyramid. These basalt pavers are irregular in thickness and often rounded on the bottom side. They were placed on top of blocks of limestone which had previously been fitted to the underbelly bedrock. Amazingly, the basalt blocks were cut to level in situ after they'd been put in place on the ground. The edges are so crisp and parallel. The quality of this work indicates that the blade was held completely steady. Apparently, cutting basalt was not so slow and arduous that extra cuts like these would have been avoided, as being an unnecessary waste of time. There are several places where overcuts like these can be seen. They show no trace of the wobbling cuts that might be expected of a long hand-pulled blade as it starts into hard material. That may be because these cuts were made as the blade was coming out of a cut above it, and it was held firmly in place by the rock above it. We know that the stone box in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid was cut with a very large saw, one which was longer than the box, perhaps 10 feet. The marks on the bottom of the box were discovered and described by Flinders Petrie. He also described an error in cutting that went off the mark before the workers noticed to back out the saw from the cut and start over. These questions could perhaps be answered if microscopic examinations of the cut marks by contemporary specialists in manufacturing technology could analyze it. The works of William Flinders Petrie pioneered this research in the 1880s. Petrie, in Egypt particularly, he showed there was an order or protocol for creating artifacts that involved the use of simple geometries, and such as simple radius, over how radii are combined to create a shape where one radius would lead to another radius, that would then be tangent with a flat surface. And you find that at Giza near the pyramids, and also other places around Egypt. There are so many remarkable artifacts that really have not received that much attention in conventional literature. And the simple methods that are described by Egyptologists don't really answer the question of how these artifacts were created. Because it's not just a matter of describing a tool and how you actually remove material from a block of granite, but also a range of instruments that would have been necessary to ensure that the measurements are consistent throughout the creation of those artifacts. The tools to measure are equally important as those used to cut, drill, and polish. Those tools don't exist in the archaeological record, nor have they been even suggested in the conventional literature that they did exist. So it's an open question right now, and it's certainly open for study by Egyptologists or universities who would care or dare to take up the challenge. And that challenge is to be able to come up with methods that would explain these artifacts in a way that modern engineers would understand and believe. Unfortunately, in the past, this has not taken place. We've not been directed or shown by people in Egyptology or in academia. We haven't been shown any methods that will adequately explain the creation of these artifacts. For example, perfectly flat surfaces that you find on the igneous rock or the granite and basalt diorite artifacts that occur all over Egypt. You'll find a very large block in the Valley Temple near the Sphinx at Giza. There's one wall where there is a diorite block that shows a high order of precision, being extremely flat. Comparative measurements using a very precise straight edge show precision to 1/10 the thickness of a human hair. Whilst this is extremely precise, you also find those kind of surfaces in the Great Pyramid and the granite box in the Great Pyramid, also the Second Pyramid. There are numerous very large, what they call sarcophagi, in the Serapeum, and these sarcophagi are supposedly built to bury bulls. But the precision and the size of these boxes that seem to indicate a much higher purpose. One that would serve a technological purpose rather than just for a funeral. Because on the inside of the boxes, you not only find very precise, flat surfaces, but also the corners where one surface meets another are extremely square. Also, the wall of the inside of the box where it meets the lid is extremely square. The fact that these artifacts and work materials exist has not been adequately explained in the literature we're trying to understand to really come to grips with. Egyptology isn't trying to come to grips with anything, even how we will create these artifacts today, because it would really stretch our capabilities to make these artifacts, particularly the ones in the Serapeum. But these are fairly simple geometries. We go from the simple to the complex, and then it becomes a little more difficult to explain, because not only a flat surface is fairly simple to understand in terms of how you would grind a surface flat now. When we move to more complex surfaces, we find that there are objects that have curved surfaces or radii, and gathering the information about those, I've tried to determine how they were created. And gathering the information about those, I've tried to determine how they were created. But before you can actually do that, you have to determine exactly what it is that you're looking at, and that you can't do that without taking measurements. So taking measurements of those artifacts. When you have complex compound surfaces and compound radii that flow from one to the other, and also they seem to follow a general direction, or the contours are maybe cut, and then that contour flows along a straight line, and that straight line on an axis is very precise, to almost as though it would be made on a machine. And that, of course, is a very controversial suggestion. In today's world, you have to consider that because the two created any other way, it would be enormously difficult. And certainly for an artifact that's supposed to be part of a construction, it wouldn't require that much of that high precision if it was just for our construction purposes. If it was made by hand, it would take an enormous amount of time for you to create that precision, and it wouldn't be necessary anyway. Those are the kind of questions that need to be asked when we look at these artifacts. It's a question of what tools would have been used to create it, and when we ask those questions, we tend to lean more towards the fact that the machines or the tools that they were using to create them were capable of no lesser precision and what appears in the piece. Flinders Petrie was very outspoken on these issues over a century ago, stating, "The methods employed by the Egyptians in cutting the hard stones, which they so frequently worked, have long remained undetermined. Various suggestions have been made, some very impractical, but no actual proofs of the tools employed, or the manner of using them, have been obtained." Amazingly, he recognized the immense importance by today's standards all the way back then. He gave detailed analysis of engineering enigma. The typical method of working hard stones, such as granite, diorite, basalt, etc., was by means of bronze tools. These were set with cutting points, far harder than the quartz which was operated on. The material of these cutting points is yet undetermined, but only 5 substances are possible: beryl, topaz, chrysoberyl, corundum or sapphire, and diamond. The character of the work would certainly seem to point to diamond as being the cutting jewel, and only the considerations of its rarity in general interfere with this conclusion. In Memphis, there's an open-air museum there with a statue of Ramses, which is lying on its back. One of the things that's looking down the length of the Ramses statue, the face seems to be extraordinarily regular and precise, and particularly the nostrils being identical on both sides, which is unusual to find somebody or some person with their identical nostrils. The ancient Egyptians were being very precise and symmetrical in the creation of their statues. In the Luxor temple, the head of Ramses on his statue is so perfect looking. How could anyone not find this puzzling? The famous author and manufacturing engineer Christopher Dunn, who's done so much to bring these enigmas to light, has shown the complexities of this engineering prowess. The symmetry in the Ramses face is very remarkable precision. Overlaying 2D transparent photos shows this amazing feat of engineering. When you realize it's 3-dimensionally symmetric, it becomes mind-boggling at that point. Christopher Dunn is by far one of the most prominent experts on this entire issue. The level of sophistication that the ancient Egyptians had used in creating these statues is simply incredible. The Ramses statue in situ at the Temple of Luxor is not a rogue example. Reportedly, over 100 Ramses statues were created. Another famous one is in the British Museum, and it's in the exact same condition of precision and symmetry. The interesting thing about the British Museum statue of Ramses, we see that there was a mistake in the manufacture of that statue, where there was a dig in the corner of the mouth where the tool had cut too deep, and then in order to compensate for that, they had to cut the lips deeper into the face, which created a very sharp cusp. Human hands really didn't have much control over, because they did not have to do those mistakes by hand. Again, we return to Flinders Petrie's analysis for insight. Many nations are in the habit of cutting hard materials by means of a soft substance, as copper, wood, horn, etc., with a hard powder applied to it. The powder sticks in the basis employed, and this being scraped over the stone to be cut so it wears away. Many persons have therefore very readily assumed, as I myself did at first, that this method must necessarily have been used by the Egyptians, and that it would suffice to produce all the examples now collected. Such, however, is far from being the case, though no doubt in alabaster, in other soft stones this method was employed. Let us take a moment to recap what we do know, what we can ascertain or accept from what we know. They had tube drills with drill bits and the necessary machinery to hold them in place and apply rotational torque. They had saws that could cut granite with ease and precision, producing amazing symmetry. They had the ability to work the hardest of rocks, and more often preferred to do so. In addition, they applied their techniques finishing granite in situ, after a block had been placed in a wall or on the surface of a pyramid, which literally boggles the mind. They had the ability to cut, level, and polish granite to a sophisticated degree of perfection. They had lathe machinery that would turn and polish granite, schist, basalt, etc. in ways we've not duplicated in our modern society. They cut extremely accurate parallel limestone joints with such a remarkable flatness over huge surface areas, some 35 square feet or more, a technique they'd mastered before creating the casing of the Great Pyramid at Giza. They had the knowledge and technology to repeatedly lift, maneuver, and delicately place enormous weights of stone at various heights. They had the motivation and means to quarry and move millions of stone blocks. They had the administrative skill to foresee multi-generational works, all that they require for a very long planning and project continuity, whilst maintaining the commitment of many generations of craftsmen, from apprenticeship through retirement of the workforce. Putting it this way, the pyramid builders of ancient Egypt have achieved the implementation of the largest, most ambitious, and vast long-term engineering construction program in the history of mankind, by a long shot. Flinders Petrie never could satisfy his curiosity over the working of quartz, saying that the Egyptians were acquainted with a cutting jewel far harder than quartz, and that they used this jewel as a sharp-pointed graver, is put beyond doubt by the diorite bowls with inscriptions of the 4th dynasty, of which I found fragments at Giza, as well as the scratches on polished granite of Ptolemaic age at San. The hieroglyphs are incised, with a very free cutting point. They're not scraped or ground out, but are plowed through the diorite, with rough edges to the line. As the lines are only 1/150th of an inch wide, the figures being about 0.2 long, it's evidence that the cutting point must have been much harder than quartz, and tough enough not to splinter when so fine an edge was being employed, probably only 1/200th of an inch wide. Parallel lines are graved only 1/30th of an inch apart from the center to center. Dendera Temple provides the same baffling discoveries with respect to ancient stone cutting techniques and advanced machining in the ancient world. Just like the Luxor Temple, the consistency and repetition in geometries in the Dendera Temple are revealed when we study the Hypostyle Hall. This impressive structure, as you can enter the temple, contains 24 columns each, about 90 meters high, and they have a capital on the top, which is 4-sided capital with 4 phases of the goddess Hathor. The capital columns in this Hypostyle Hall are all in alignment with each other in a very surprising and precise way. When we look at the geometric features of the capitals, even the ears of Hathor seem to be in alignment. There are many complex geometric elements at play with various overlapping ellipses, and this repeats on each face of the 4-sided columns. To imagine constructing this hallway with all these columns and capitals, when we consider that the height to which these capitals were placed and the potential for error and communication of error, how were they able to precisely align each of those features? Also, what we find is that the capitals are not in one piece. They were made in several pieces, and the builders were able to detect the split lines, were able to determine where those split lines were, then very precisely put it all together. The whole temple was manufactured very precisely before being erected and put into place for assembly. Egyptologists profess, at least on site at Dendera anyhow, to how this remarkable complex feat was achieved. As laughable as the following theory is, it's perpetrated repeatedly with zero knowledge of manufacturing procedures and blatant disregard for the evidence in front of them. Allegedly, the builders brought up rough blocks and mud ramps, placing the blocks on top of one another, and then starting at the top and chipping the material away, removing the sand or mud as they got lower and lower and lower, basically finishing their work on the way down. What that evidence really shows you is that is not the case. Everything was made perfectly well by hand and then assembled. Considering the extraordinary amount of work that went into creating the Dendera Temple, it's hard to imagine the preposterous scenario where primitive tools created such a marvelous wonder of craftsmanship. One of the biggest mysteries in Egyptology is if the textbooks on what tools were employed by the ancient Egyptians in the thousands of years that the ancient Egyptian civilization existed, some 3,000 years, you can follow the development of tools from the beginning of that civilization to the end. And we start out using copper chisels, stone balls, stone chisels, wooden mallets, and then 3,000 years later, we're using the same thing. Yet, if you look at the extraordinary sophistication and genius of the ancient Egyptian artifacts and temples, To think that those engineers were still not advanced in their stone tools in thousands of years or did not improve their techniques, it's counterintuitive to even consider it all. We must ask the question where the tools are. We know that they existed and that we just haven't found them yet. We know that they had engineers. We know that they had craftsmen. We can't deny that, and engineers don't just function that way. They'll make improvements to their processes in any generation. In any part of you that have people with engineering lines, they'll continually improve their tools, sometimes very rapidly, but certainly over a 3,000-year period. Producing the level of work they did, something is obviously missing. There's an ancient mystery that resides on this planet, so unique that it stands out amongst all the other mysteries. Bizarre vitrified ancient ruins and stones, melted and molded rocks, perfectly fitting, with no known technology of how this was done. It's no secret that many rocks have an unusual look in Cusco and the surrounding temples. Everyone else visits has their own theory of how it was done, because there's no known method of how it was done. It's like anything goes. Every possible theory's been concocted because of the impossible stonework, the beyond difficult engineering, and yet to do be replicated in modern time. If it is they were softened at some point and have been molded into their present form and shape, in many cases they have a mirrored finish with a strong reflection mimicking metal or glass. There are many ancient ruins and artifacts around the world that have worked stones with advanced machining techniques, but what we see in Peru is stones that were affected with a high heat or vitrification process. It's as baffling as it gets. These ancient sacred temples of Peru and Bolivia exhibit stonework with an appearance of being cut like butter. Engineers admit this, archaeology ignores it, and nothing's ever solved. The appearance is what we're left with. There are often two styles at so-called Inca temples. Many refer to them as Inca stonework and pre-Inca stonework, as clearly there are two different designers, two different styles, and two different appearances. Often we see the two different styles side by side. The cave of Naupa Iglesia, or Choquequirá, is a perfect example of this. We see crude work alongside incredible feats of stonework, whereby typically the impeccable stonework is featured as an altar of some sort. There's another style of the perfect fitting stones, walls where not even a needle point can be inserted between the stone blocks. They can be found in multi-angled, polyagonal-sided blocks of incredible sizes. But the general characteristic is always the impossible perfect fit. This is what leaves the majority to conclude that they must have been soft at one point. These stones often exhibit a section that's vitrified, which is at the borders. Sometimes we recognize vitrification on the surface layer. Orthodox science provides nothing. There are zero convincing explanations on any method of construction. To the trained eye, engineers and stonemasons stipulate the molding and vitrification are obvious once you know what you're looking for. Still, orthodox science has mundane, ridiculously impractical explanations. Pioneering researcher Alfredo Gamarra, who proposed the theory of the softening of the stone, molding, and subsequent vitrification, was ahead of his time. Everyone agrees, at least the rational people, that the builders had some unusual special technique to reach these outlandish, astonishing results. What's the evidence of a special technique being utilized? Well, firstly, we see rocks melted, physical evidence with no known technique for achieving the high heat. We often see a mirrored finish on the stones, sometimes like a reflection or smooth to touch like polish. Whenever we see vitrification is visible, we sometimes see it as a layer over the stone, whereby it's flaked or something has interrupted the process. When we discover surfaces that are completely smooth to touch in all cases, it would have been extremely difficult to polish this undulating original surface. The enormous scale and the repetitive techniques put this type of construction technique almost on an industrial scale. Time to achieve this level of precision by carving and polishing doesn't enter common sense. Often the stones exhibit magnetic properties, showing more physical evidence. There's also examples of discoloration, another sign the rocks were treated. Metal clamps and T-shaped grooves is another anomaly that comes up.
Inserting metal clamps through a process of a mobile smelter, thus pouring into the adjoining T-grooves on a joint, is incredibly technical and begs to be explained. Why? Author Maurice Cotterill believes they were electrically sealing the joints and shows that many of these joints occur on crystalline content stonework joints. The use of metal clamps and T-grooves happening in Tiwanaku, Ollantaytambo, Coricancha, and the site of Yarak Rumi, Vilcabamba. Examples are also known in Egypt. The grooves appear to be sealed to the colossal blocks in the structure. Pumapunku and Tiwanaku exhibit several grooves which can still be observed. There is wild debate over the metal composition of these clamps, whether it's from a very special alloy. Others say it's of a composition that's perfectly normal for Tiwanaku inhabitants. Why on earth would the builders use or need a small metal clamp to hold large stone blocks in place? Physically, there'd be no need. Symbolically, maybe? Electrically? The T-groove in Ollantaytambo, when observed, not only shows a bigger part of the stone is vitrified, but part of the groove as well. Author Maurice Cotterill may be the one to crack this mystery wide open, writing, "Many scholars believe the straps were melted locally and then poured into the grooves in the stones, causing microscopic marks embedded in the straps can be seen to imitate corollary marks found in the stone. If the straps had been poured in situ, then the surface of each strap would be expected to be slightly convex, due to influence of surface tension experienced in the casting process. Secondly, these straps themselves would have adopted a cast line caused by the crack between the stone blocks. But the stones do not feature such a mark. A closer look at one of the blocks shows a discolored outer layer of stone. It's thought the surface of the stone has been somehow softened and later hardened, permitting the introduction of the ready-formed copper strip. This would explain away the flat-top nature of the straps and the absence of the interblock cast line. So, what does this all mean? The clamps would have been inserted whilst the stones were in a soft state, and the clamps would have already been hard. The vitrified examples under study come from famous Peruvian and Bolivian sites in South America. Without testing, the debate is open to claims of unusual polishing techniques, natural degradation, lava flows, and many other odd explanations. The analysis at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku really sets the precedent on some of these ideas. Tiwanaku, a region of Peru that holds many remnants of ancient civilizations, demonstrates some of the most unique and amazingly precise examples of stonework in the world. The ancient people who created these walls and buildings used such a high degree of mathematical expertise that the workmanship is astounding even to modern-day people. They marvel at how these stonecutters from long ago created it with simple hand tools. But was it done by hand? That's the question. The high plains of Peru and Bolivia and the Andes Mountains holds a wealth of historical sites, each one more amazing than the next. Scholars and archaeologists had only seen the same type of masonry in ancient Egypt before this. Although some historians call this Inca architecture, this later time period civilization had little to do with creating these fantastic structures. The Incas dominated this area from approximately the 13th to 14th century CE up until the time of the Spanish explorers' conquest of the region. Indeed, they built some magnificent structures, but the ones most interesting for their precision and longevity came from even older groups. Some of these empires were called the Wari and Tiwanaku. They existed hundreds or even thousands of years before the Inca came to power. Multiple historians who specialize in architectural studies have dedicated a lot of time and knowledge to figuring out how ancient groups of people who did not use advanced tools or even the wheel could create such structures. The most advanced chisels and hammers of the time would have been created from copper, stone, and wood. With these simple hand tools, people dug granite, andesite, and porphyry out of quarries. After transporting them to their final locations, they then carved them with smooth precision so they would fit together almost seamlessly. What techniques could these ancient experts use to make such flat and smooth surfaces, exact angles, and joints that would not allow a single blade of grass to squeeze between? Historians can only guess about some of the methods that allowed for such unique stone cutting and building styles. Besides the building details that still give modern people pause, another incredibly distinctive trait of megalithic structures found in the Andean plateaus is the vitrification of some of the stones. Although vitrified means to essentially transform something into glass, the stones themselves are not chemically altered. Instead, they're somehow changed to have an exceptionally smooth, shiny, and reflective surface. It allows for a high degree of light reflection that's not usual in granite or andesite. Now it's possible to use modern tools and polish the stone so that it reflects light and even figures most successfully. Ancient people did use abrasives and sand or powdered rock from quartz and other materials to polish decorative stones as well. However, none of these methods would be able to produce vitrified rock as successfully as these ancient people did. Not only was the surface highly reflective, it was altered in an outer layer that could not be explained by any conventional means. The other evidence for the vitrification of Andean stonework in some architectural sites includes textural changes and even color changes from the original rock type seen in other parts of the construction project. Also, people who studied these vitrified stones more closely discovered evidence of softening or melting in order to facilitate the transformation to a reflected surface. They found odd changes in magnetic properties identified with compasses and other tools. There's no true explanation why this would occur or what it would do for the vitrification process. If the large stone with a vitrified surface was attached to others with metal clamps for joining purposes, these sockets also showed signs that they were vitrified in some way. The completeness of the process has surely led to unique speculation and the need for more investigation to figure out how it occurred in those relatively primitive days. Archaeologists have discovered multiple instances of the vitrification differences throughout various ancient megalithic sites in Peru. The following examples are just some that are more intriguing and raise considerable questions for those who study these types of stonework anomalies. Within Cusco, the Incan capital, a certain temple called the Enclosure of Gold, or Coricancha, was constructed out of large, neat blocks of hard stone used most frequently in the area. These imperial-style structures demonstrate the fine stonework abilities of the ancient architects and builders. Today, Santo Domingo Church and Convent lies on top of the ruins, which makes studying them a bit more difficult, not to mention the distasteful imposing structure on the cultural heritage. What historians have gleaned from their studies shows some evidence that the Incan temple predates their empire by quite a bit. As we outline the Tiahuanaco architecture, for example, frequently used T-grooves with metal clamps to attach one stone to another. However, the Inca did not use this method in their later buildings. Other details point to the Wari as being responsible for some or all of the construction. Scholars often notice astronomical alignments more often used by those earlier groups. The Enclosure of Gold temple contains the central courtyard, surrounding walls, multiple terraces, and many interior rooms used for a variety of reasons. It would have originally sat on the banks of the Huaytani River, which has changed over the years to a much smaller stream. The temple is edged by a curved wall that seems to have been used for astronomy and the study of the stars. It may also have had significant use during sun worship or ceremonies. This wall shows an excellent example of vitrification of the granite and other stones used here. Some of the evidence of heating or compositional changes are not present, but the stones do reflect light almost as effectively as a mirror. Besides its reflective nature, the Coricancha outer wall clearly demonstrates the precision of stone joinery practiced by these ancient civilizations. Nearly no space or indentation exists between the stones. Even the joints themselves that run parallel to the ground show signs of vitrification. They're also amazingly straight, level, and even spaced. The vertical joints do not follow the same precise paths or rules as the horizontal ones. Still, the pink and gray granite stone is obviously fitted together with a high degree of skill and care. Upon closer inspection, the straight horizontal joints running throughout the entire wall has an even more exact and purposeful shape to them. Every stone base is not straight. Instead, the bottom of one is curved out slightly to fit exactly into the inward curve of the block below it. While these shapes are relatively minute, they're obviously not a mistake due to their precise nature. The intention of the stonemasons seems to focus on making a very strong wall where the stones would lock in place rather than simply rest on top of one another. Still, despite the regular curves, each juncture has no gaps or errors. No doubts exist in the architectural historian's mind that the stones that make up this temple wall were not fitted haphazardly or without exceptional degrees of skill and care. The stonecutters or builders who constructed the temple must have spent a lot of time achieving these perfect locking fits. The understanding of construction strength that led these ancient people to create the curved edges that lock together is considerable. Their wall was able to withstand earthquakes, for example, much more effectively than a wall with perfectly straight stone edges would. Add to the considerable skill the fact that the joints show signs of vitrification, and even more questions arise about how the people before the Inca could have such a high degree of knowledge and skill when it came to building with stones. Any archaeologist studying the site must only pass a flashlight across the seams in the evenings or nights to see the reflective surfaces and joints. Whatever process they used, the end result was a much stronger bond at the joints than if the vitrification did not occur. The vitrified surfaces do not only show up in the joints, however. People have studied the ruins of the temples also found interior stones with an outside layer of reflective material. In some instances, the vitrified surfaces have been removed in a rather crude way with a chisel and hammer. Historians who studied the entire time span of the building and walls surmise this may have happened in order to paint or stucco them once the Spanish colonized the area. Other interior surfaces made of stone were carved with precise niches, grooves, and holes that extended straight into the granite blocks. While these do not have obvious purposes at this late date, it's quite common to assume that they were used to hang decorative items such as plaques, banners, or even figurines or statues. The holes range in depth from just 4 centimeters to 50 centimeters deep. The enclosure of gold in Cusco is not the only building that showed signs of vitrification and incredibly accurate stonework. Up on the hill above the city rests Sacsayhuaman, a massive fortress built from excessively large stone blocks. Some of the granite and anthracite weighed upward of 300 tons. Despite how difficult it must have been to move them into position, they show evidence of extremely exact joint work. The vitrification that occurs here seems to indicate that high heat was used to shape or connect the megaliths with very narrow seams between them. Some of the large stones have apparently molten scars from whatever process vitrified their surfaces long ago. Near this hillside fort lies a unique round amphitheater called Rodadero. One construction feature, called the Throne of the Inca, shows heavy signs of vitrification on many surfaces. These vitrified stones form some of the broad steps that lead up to the top platform, altars and niches undoubtedly used for ceremonies many centuries ago. An added feature is the discovery that these stone steps that show evidence of vitrification are also highly magnetized. Of course, over the millennia, since these areas were constructed, the weather has eroded much of the stone surfaces. This partially destroyed some of the vitrification that may have been evident on most platforms and steps. Some of the larger stones, which weigh over 100 tons, have been altered significantly by what appears to be the application of high heat. Some of the megaliths are split, have changed texture, or their color's been altered from the original natural state. Vitrification is visible on stones in a more protected spot. It's possible that some of the damaged stonework occurred when the parts of the building fell down due to earthquakes, time, and the effects of extreme weather events. However, the evidence that extremely high degrees of heat contributed to the problem leaves some historians mystified. Also on the Rodadero Hill, archaeologists discovered a tunnel with the vitrified stone ceiling and walls. Additional tunnels and natural cave parts show mirrored surfaces that reflect light easily. Erosion has opened some of these tunnels to the weather since they were built in ancient times. This helped researchers discover more about the extensive network and experience the vitrification in more obvious ways. However interesting the tunnels are, there's no evidence that clearly shows what they were used for. Also, near Sacsayhuaman, another ancient architecture site called Kenko shows off the ancient civilization interest in massive stone blocks, careful carving and sitting, and vitrified surfaces. Again, the years have not been kind to the underground areas or interiors of the buildings. Erosion and collapse have opened chambers and tunnels to the air and weather. As with most ancient locations, the exact purpose and use of Kenko is mostly a matter of guesswork and supposition on the part of the baffled historians who research it. The construction, carvings, and chambers included in these structures seem to indicate that the location once contained a canal system. Also, a central chamber with altars and tables, which is assumed to be religious or funerary locations, show considerable vitrification. Although interesting from a historical standpoint, the nearby Temple of the Monkeys and Temple of the Moon are often overlooked because the other sites are larger and have more megalithic stones. However, they still provide an interesting look into the construction abilities and lifestyles of those ancient civilized people. A collection of underground caves contains altars and other platforms undoubtedly used for funerals and religious rites. The people apparently used their unique construction techniques to augment the natural geology of the area. In the largest cave with ceremonial trappings, every other wall, floor, staircase, and platform has a vitrified surface. This protected location has allowed the unique surfaces to remain largely unchanged for a very long time. Here, the vitrification is extensive and exceptionally well preserved. The stone surfaces reflect light almost as well as mirrored glass would. Unfortunately, other places in the two temples are now exposed to the outside weather, and the vitrification has started to disappear. It seems there's no shortage of amazing architectural sites in this area of Peru near the Inca capital city of Cusco. Another, called Ollantaytambo, was a massive fort built into the side of a hill. The land was terraced extensively, massive stone block walls were constructed around the perimeter, and the location culminated in a glorious Temple of the Sun at the top. The wall itself represents an incredibly impressive architectural feat for people using simple tools and manpower. Each stone block was transported from a quarry at least 5 kilometers away, across ravines, plains, and hills, and finally up the mountain to the final position. Some weighed in excess of 14,000 pounds. It is these megaliths fashioned from porphyry that impress archaeologists most of all. Although debate still rages about the possible carvings or facade on the surface of these 6 giant stones, what is left to enjoy today clearly demonstrates the high degree of skill and dedication that these early people had to their architectural endeavors. The base of the hill is littered with massive and now weathered stones that were either rejected for the temple or left for some other reason. It seems that some were connected in the Tiwanaku style with metal clamps and T-grooves after they had laid exposed to the weather for some time. Apparently, the Inca were fond of reusing existing materials for their own purposes. Are the Inca just custodians? This part of Peru contains some of the finest archaeological sites in the most advanced and precise stonework and architecture ever developed in the ancient world. The vitrification of the granite, andesite, and other stone creates a unique metallic look, not found in many other places. Although the craftsmanship is exquisite, you can still see evidence of the protuberances originally used to transport the blocks over long distances. While they were very useful for this, it remains questionable why they were not smoothed out during the actual construction process. It's possible that the part of the property where they're most prominent was not finished like all the others. Atop the terrace of the Temple of the Sun, a multi-sided wall called Ollantaytambo rests. Its reflective surface must have gleamed in the sunlight as the ancient people went about their worship activities. This location has a wide selection of different types of rock: andesite, basalt, pinkish porphyry, and diorite. Like in many other walls and temples, these stone joints have been vitrified so they reflect light. The effect is especially prominent wherever rocks have fallen out or been removed from the structures. It becomes obvious that the adjoining faces of the stones were vitrified before they were fitted together perfectly. This must have had some practical purpose, as it was not usually done to visible surfaces. Those were polished in more mundane ways, but not vitrified to create the extremely reflective surface. Although archaeologists see it as an aesthetic trait now, perhaps it was purely functional all those centuries ago. Also, because it occurs only on interior touching surfaces, It's obvious that vitrification was done artificially in some way and not a result of, for example, a wildfire or lightning strike. As interesting as the vitrification of the stone is, researchers disagree on one very important factor. Some argue that the vitrified layer is not part of the original stone at all. Instead, they believe it's a different type of material that was layered on top of the stone as a form of mortar or cement. It's difficult to figure out what the truth is on these ancient structures. From the research that's already been done, the layers seem like the stone, but has undergone some sort of chemical transformation. Another sign that points to a more natural explanation is that some parts of caves and tunnels that have not been changed by human hands also show signs of vitrification. The steps leading to the Temple of the Sun were vitrified on many surfaces. Other parts were polished in ways that archaeologists recognize from the civilizations that made it. Scientific study of the materials themselves has not been done in any great measure. Above Cusco lies a place of archaeological interest with considerable number of caves called Titicaca. Scientists from a university in Holland were able to take microscopic photographs of the stone itself in order to solve the mystery once and for all. They found that the regular stone and the layer that had been vitrified were distinctly different in makeup. However, they also found a thin layer between them that showed a granular transition from one state to the next. Just like you'd see charcoal change to charred wood, change to unburned wood on a log that had been in a fire. So too did this vitrified stone show 3 distinct layers. This demonstrates that the vitrification was not a part of something applied to the top of the stone. When studied chemically, some differences in the makeup of the stone are also noted. The vitrified layer contains elements not normally found in the type of stone used for the block. Mostly there was evidence of higher amounts of silica, which seemed to point to an application process or chemical or heat process that cannot truly be explained knowing the technology of the time. Melting or chemically changing the stones with high heat would require some type of furnace that operated above 1,000 degrees Celsius or extremely high pressure. How these ancient people could do such things is beyond the understanding of modern archaeologists. Vitrification of stone used in early civilization building sites has been found throughout Cusco, Chinchero, Tambamachay, and surrounding areas. Archaeologists have also found evidence of this unique and mysterious process at Machu Picchu. In some locations, it seemed to be quite a popular way to create stunning reflections of light and shadow on walls and temples. In other locations, such as the Temple of the Three Windows and the main temple plaza, it served as a more functional purpose on the stone surface that was touched at the joints. It's not all walls either. There are bizarrely cut rocks that exhibit clear technical function. The sacred site called Kiarumiak, with semicircular incision, as if a laser removed a template cut technical device, is literally off the charts. The unusual symbol features a 7-tiered motif arranged around a central cavity, angled slightly upwards towards the heavens. It's always been associated with the moon, known as the place of the moon rock. Kiarumiak was used long before 1200 AD, when the Incas are thought to have arrived in the Cusco region. It's unclear whether the stepped semicircle curved in the limestone rock depicts a moon rainbow or something else. But since it faces east, it may align with the solstice or equinox, sunrises. The designs have been a sundial of sorts, serving as a timekeeping tool. Some people suggest a large limestone outcrop into which the crescent is carved has the shape of a puma, and that the crescent is its eye. Interestingly, the crescent contains 7 intricately carved steps or platforms along its circumference. Why the number 7? Since ancient times, this number has played a significant role in religion, astrology, numerology, alchemy, and mysticism. Especially concerning the measurement of time, for example, there are 7 days in a week, a system typically attributed to the Babylonians, who accorded 1 day for each of the heavenly bodies. The Romans later named 7 days of the week after their gods. Whatever Kiarumiak is, it's clearly technical and likely astronomical. The use of such enormous blocks is the only reason these ancient structures have survived until today, even though they're in a seismically active region. Why was it so important they last for thousands of years? The master masons had complete understanding of stone, of masonry, to such a level that they could extraordinary, wonderful feats. The unusual angles, tightly fitted, is what captures the imagination of all who see them. Not even earthquakes can break them loose. This unusual method of interlocking enormous stones together is synonymous with ancient Egypt. Who developed these engineering techniques? Why were these techniques so important? Granite blocks there have been so technically articulated, many believe precision power tools is the only way. Archaeologists are completely puzzled by this ancient site and believe even commenting on it will make them look crazy. Not only do these granite blocks have smooth precision corners, but they also have precise drill holes in grooves at the same depth consistently. It's completely astonishing work, no matter what way you look at it, even by today's standards. Yet insults of primitive cultures doing this is still the narrative. The H blocks at Pumapunku seem to get the most attention. The whole site looks like a prefabricated system of construction. Pioneering technologist Christopher Dunn has sophisticatedly showed the dovetail design in the H block to incredible accuracy and clearly intentional. Everything points to lost technology. Mechanical, engineering, and logistically, analysis with every aspect of their methods of construction. It was clearly easy for them to do this, whatever their method. Even alternative researchers seem to polarize themselves when there are clearly two different technologies at play: the ability to heat and soften stone, and advanced machining techniques. New baffling discoveries made in the colossal ruins of Baalbek, Lebanon, provide evidence of a past super-civilization so technically advanced in ancient times that many researchers are left speechless. Baalbek is the name of the archaeological site in Lebanon. In Roman times, it was known as Heliopolis, or the City of the Sun. The biggest enigma that have historians in an uproar is just how old are the ruins? The original Canaanite temples could be 2,000 years older than the Roman remains left today. The question is, had the Canaanites done what the Romans did? In other words, did they build upon the site as well? The oldest part of the ruins at Baalbek fit absolutely no known culture and were originally employed for some mysterious purpose. To further increase their mysterious origin and original use, these megaliths are not foundation stones, as they're always declared. They represent the top course of stones of the original edifice, whatever that may have been. The heaviest stone block at Baalbek is 1,650 tons, so that's gigantic beyond belief, but there it stands. A block of stone that's weighing 2, 3, 4, or 5 tons is a huge heavy stone. And when you start talking about 50 or 100 tons, things start getting epic. 500 tons, then everyone including engineers are completely stunned. Above that, the mind boggles. Many of these megaliths are much older than the archaeologists are saying, including Baalbek. Baalbek is a partial Roman temple, and mainstream archaeology is saying that Baalbek is a purely Roman temple, and that the Romans built all of it. What you really have there is a pre-Roman structure, with massive blocks of what they're calling ashlars. They're the foundation stones of Baalbek, and you have almost the same thing at Jerusalem, at Solomon's Temple. The gigantic blocks of stone that are the base of Solomon's Temple, one called the Western Stone, is a giant block of stone that wasn't visible until the Israelis dug a tunnel along the base of King Solomon's Temple, and that allowed us to see the stone. These are the super megaliths that historians and engineers should be trying to figure out first. Yet we always are told how they shifted 5-ton blocks around with sheer force. Many believe the remnants of this culture have been wiped out in a flood of epic proportions, and as sea levels have risen, that's where we should be looking. Research is slowly coming, telling us the flood thesis might be true. During a high-resolution mapping of the Mediterranean seafloor, researchers discovered an enormous stone monolith resting in the Sicilian Channel. Ancient people have crafted the monolith, however, it's unclear how ancient people living at least 9,500 years ago were able to cut, extract, transport, and install the stone. There are hundreds of known sunken cities in the Mediterranean alone. Malta boasts many of these and mysterious cart ruts that go into the sea. Malta at one point was hit by a giant flood-like cataclysm. We know this from Gar Dalam cave above the coastline, which had Ice Age animals compacted inside in an ancient flood. Ancient civilizations always seem to head back to Atlantis, Lemuria, the megaliths in South America, as well as underwater ruins in the Bahamas are no exception. Atlantis was tied to the underwater Bimini Wall with Edgar Cayce's prediction. However, Atlantis as a story is traced back through Egypt from the Egyptian story of Solon. Atlantis was a global civilization before 10,000 BC, and that's the legend of Atlantis. But archaeologists and historians like the civilization starting in Sumeria. Göbekli Tepe seems to uproot this long-held concept, and what we're obviously looking at is a restart of civilization, perhaps many times. That's what you would expect from a global cataclysm of epic proportions. Any traces of civilization before the 10,000 BC era would essentially be labeled Atlantis. India speaks of tale like this, and the lost continent of Kumari Kandam. The Tamils claim that they're part of a lost continent that's now underwater south of India between Australia. Sri Lanka was part of this Tamil Atlantean kingdom. When we come to Peru in South America, we come across so many similarities with Egypt and Cyclopean supermegaliths, we really must consider the Atlantis thesis as highly plausible. Maybe these myth tellers are recounting their forgotten history. The huge blocks of stone located at Ollantaytambo in Peru are a fine example of high craftsmanship, heavy lifting and bizarre techniques being replicated across the Atlantic, with a practice known as keystone cuts. These uniquely shaped cuts, done in megalithic blocks, is a very unusual way to put blocks together, but you find these keystone cuts in all kinds of different parts of the world. Pumapunku in Bolivia is a prime example of these keystone cuts, and they're cuts in blocks of stone upon which molten metals are poured into the motif. The keystone is always across the joint, leading many to think the metal connection is hermetically bonding the blocks together. When we come to the megaliths of Easter Island, and particularly to the quarry on Easter Island, we get into the mind-boggling territory once again. Easter Island is a triangular island with up to 3 volcanoes, and there's a 4th volcano sort of in the center of the island, a little bit off to the side. And it's this one where all the statues on Easter Island were quarried. There are hundreds of statues recorded at Easter Island. Some were moved out of the quarry and placed around the islands facing inland, supposedly to protect the island. What happened at Easter Island is they made all these statues, left them at the quarry, but they didn't do anything with them. They didn't move them anywhere. They're just sitting still at the quarry, in a sense, on the side of the hill. In fact, most of them are buried up to their chests, according to the early natives on Easter Island. What they would have to do is move the statues to the edge of the island. According to the islanders, their Easter Island, Rapa Nui, was part of a continent, a lost continent like a Lemuria. This continent, their homeland, sank beneath the ocean. The only part of their land that didn't sink beneath the ocean was Easter Island. To protect their island from sinking, like the rest of the land, they put statues all around the edge of the island. Supposedly, the statues walked themselves. Easter Island, being a volcanic island, has a puzzling and magnetic anomaly so strange people often feel an unusual sense of energy there. It's often being compared to the magnetic vortex of the Bermuda Triangle. These statues are 40 to 50 feet high, but most of them are buried up to their chests. Some are lying down on the green slopes of the volcanic quarry. Was there a cataclysm that washed across the island and buried them? How would 30 feet of soil have built up around these statues in even 500 years they're supposed to have been built? It's so baffling, like these statues have been there for thousands and thousands of years, and perhaps some volcano had to go off to half bury them. All the statues that were put up around the island facing inland, they're standing on platforms. They're not buried. It's almost like the Easter Islanders later went and got some of these statues from the quarry and put them up around the island. At the museum on Easter Island, you can see the inlay in their eyes, and they would use whale ivory to put in as pupils. And there would be a piece of black obsidian as the eye itself. Before we leave Easter Island, we must address the Rongo Rongo script. It drives historians crazy, because they're left puzzled no matter what way they come at it. It seriously messes up their tidy timelines. Rongo Rongo is Oceania's only indigenous script. It's found in Easter Island only, in the center of the Pacific Ocean, over 1,000 miles from any continent. The script was first identified in 1864. However, the baffling mystery is that it's exactly like the Indus Valley script. Rongo Rongo writing is identical to the Indus Valley writing, which would be Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Valley, the civilization in Pakistan, and then half in Western India. A civilization which goes back to at least 3000 BC. In 1932, Wilhelm de Hevesy was the first academic to suggest a link between Rongo Rongo and the Indus script of the Indus Valley civilization in India, claiming that as many as 40 Rongo Rongo symbols had a correlating symbol in the script from India. For a while, the idea was entertained and debated until radiocarbon dating of the Indus Valley culture was placed between circa 3300 to 1900 BC, a finding which officially separated the two cultures by over 2,000 years. Recent research, however, has opened the debate again, as the finding of Indus Valley DNA in Australian Aborigines suggests a contact between the two cultures circa 2000 BC. The Pacific is riddled with enigmas. In Micronesia, a mysterious city called Nan Madol on the island of Pohnpei have sparked debates whether it's linked to Gunung Padang in Indonesia. On the southeast corner of Pohnpei, the huge city is built into the ocean of the giant walls built out of basalt. There's over 250 million tons of basalt stacked up in 100 artificial island walls that are 30 to 40 feet high in some places. Using prismatic crystals of basalt weighing 10 to 30 tons apiece, there's so much stone and materials in Nan Madol, the mind boggles how much effort went into building it. And why? Considering the Great Pyramid is 6 million tons approximately, and 250 million tons for Nan Madol means entire mountains would have been dismantled to get the material for the city. Bizarrely, the 8-sided prismatic basalts are magnetic, giving off strange lights. Everything about this place is off the charts. When you get your mind around 100 artificial islands, it's mind-blowing how anyone could have done this. 250 million tons of basalt stacked up into these walls, 30 feet high. Yet archaeologists have it all figured out in some ridiculous timeline. Just like Easter Island, the native inhabitants are detached from the original builders with little more than legend to explain it. Why do we always see around the planet huge cut blocks of stone when smaller ones would do? A great example of this is in Aswan, Egypt. The unfinished obelisk in the Aswan quarries, where the Aswan Dam is 100 miles from Luxor. The top of the obelisk has been squared off and cut, and there are big trenches going down the sides that have been dug out of solid granite bedrock. It's unfinished because of a natural fault they couldn't see from above. The sheer size they were attempting to quarry out is beyond belief, yet there it is. The obelisk of Axum is truly amazing that it was transported between continents twice during the last 100 years. However, the reason for delay in repatriation was the sheer difficulty in doing it. As a society today, if we struggle shifting obelisks, how did the ancients manage? And again, why did they build them so big if they did struggle? What was the gain in doing so? Amazing megalithic work in Ethiopia didn't stop at obelisks. It continued until 900 years ago, with the rock-cut churches of Lalibela, an amazing feat of stonework. Although a marvel to look at, we can easily see how something like this is quarried slowly. Working stones over 500 tons is another matter entirely. Whilst most megalithic regions in Europe boast some huge capstones, like the Antequera Dolmen in Spain and La Table de Machan in Brittany, most of the megalithic sites that encompass the nomadic culture who built them are built of more manageable size. Megalithic European sites run into the thousands upon thousands. They're everywhere. Look at a map of Europe. You'll find dense hotspots of megalithic activity in various regions. Brittany is perhaps the most famous. The broken obelisk there, Le Grand Menhir Brisé. This stone obelisk has the honor of having once been the largest known standing stone in Europe, and the largest of a huge 19-stone alignment. Today, the menhir is broken into 4 pieces, which still lie where they fell. The stone is estimated to have weighed about 355 tons when complete, and to have stood over 20 meters high. It was hand-mauled into its present shape, and an axe plow figure was once visible on the middle fragment. John Mitchell reports the nearest source of similar stone at over 50 miles distance. And even though newer reports suggest only 10 kilometers north of Auray, it still highlights the fact that the location outweighed the difficulties involved in transporting such large stones over long distances. Dol de Bretagne obelisk at 9 meters high is still hugely impressive. We're talking Neolithic times, 4000 BC to 3000 BC. And the idea we've been given of this time is little more than cavemen. The opposite is true. We're talking sophisticated transport of heavy materials in inhospitable terrains over large distances. The biggest megaliths of Europe seem to occur in the further epochs 4000 BC, and the lighter megalithic work seems to be when this culture dwindles out of existence around 1000 BC. The Commune of Carnac has more than 3,000 standing stones from the Neolithic period. These standing stones, or menhirs, are dotted around the landscape, but appear in their highest concentration at the alignments as known as the Carnac stones. Rows and rows of stones erected in lines stretching almost as far as the eye can see. It's the largest megalithic site in the world. Clearly, size is not just the only component of the mystery. Complex layouts, patterns, and geometry are at play. Astronomical alignments and observations layered into the monuments provide a layer of enigma that enthralls everyone who visits them. There are also the jaw-dropping numbers of sites involved. Some 35,000 cataloged symbolic arrangements with the same architectural features mostly across coastal Europe, but also mountainous regions inland. There's an estimated 40,000 uncatalogued lying in wait. Whilst each country tries its best to catalog vast lists of sites in various states of ruin, there are some 31 wiki pages listed. It's taken nearly 2 centuries for historians to admit that all of Europe's mysterious, massive stone structures may have had one origin source. The problem lies in that they've been painted as hunter-gatherers, one notch up above cavemen. Since we're talking about megalithic structures from the top of Scandinavia near the Arctic Circle, across the entire British Isles, from northern coastal Europe to the Mediterranean Basin, every island in the Mediterranean Basin, and right up to the Middle East of Jordan and Israel. If you showed photos of the structures, stone circles and dolmens, without telling the observer the region they were from, there would be resounding confirmation of same designer, same architect, same concept. The observation is obvious, rudimentary, and compelling. Anyone who's tried to link sites over distances has either been ridiculed or shunned. Why? Because historians would have to admit seagoing vessels and a mariner culture. It's almost as if what happened in coastal Europe was the remnants of a culture or survivors of a lost culture, scattered, and they might try to keep the knowledge, architecture, and astronomy alive. Whilst to some this might seem like a reach, it has serious credence and is highly plausible when you study megalithic Europe as a whole and admit the obvious, a common origin of all sites. In fairness, there are issues with a common origin. A recent study has laid claims that Brittany's megalithic region was the original epicenter of this marvelous ancient architecture. Evidence suggests several pockets all ignited at the same time. Northwest Ireland, Evora in Portugal, and Brittany all show massive projects in the 4800 BC era. Almendres Cromlech in Evora even shows remarkable similarities to Brittany alignments. The data we see on the ground doesn't match the study, which lays claims that the oldest is Brittany and everything else follows. Scotland and Malta show remarkable similarities also, which are at the two ends of Europe. Sardinia, Corsica, and Malta in the Mediterranean Sea, being relatively close to each other, all show such diversity in age, style, art, and architecture, it doesn't make sense. At the same time, in portraying all this, we have signature monuments like dolmens in all these regions like a beacon, saying we all have the same concept. Mariners seeking refuge in Europe from an unknown common source fits this scenario perfectly. But mariners from where? From when? Sometime before 5000 BC, people versed in massive megalithic construction hit Europe at different locations and set up camp. What looked like independent cultures doing the same bizarre, unique style independently is really one group with specific ideas scattered doing things individually. The question is, were the megalithic builders of Europe spawned from the same megalithic global culture? The style says no. Peru looks so unique, precise, and like a showroom masterpiece of masonry craftsmanship, whilst megalithic Europe looks so rough-cut, hewn and strewn together. There is the enigma of dolmens reaching Korea in the Far East that says anything is possible, and that our planet Earth really is smaller than we think. We often underestimate our ancestors. Sure, they'd be in awe of our modern technology, but when we look at the resilient monuments they created, the Great Pyramids, Stonehenge, the Moai of Easter Island, we're left speechless as well and wonder, how'd they do that? Often this question remains unanswered, and these wonderful structures are still shrouded in mystery. The dolmens of Korea are equally such an enigma. Dolmens in Korea are generally single chambers with two or more vertical stones supporting a horizontal capstone forming a tabletop. There are examples of dolmens in China and Japan, but Korea has the highest concentration of these prehistoric megaliths, around 35,000 structures, more than the rest of the world. Yet compared to dolmens in other countries, in Korea these structures have only recently been analyzed. The Pingmai dolmen in Hwasun weighs 280 tons and is by far the largest dolmen in the world. It has fairy legends associated with it, just like its European counterparts. The Ganghwa dolmen is perhaps the most recognizable of these Korean structures. Anthropologists estimate that it took 200 to 300 people to erect the megalith. It also has folklore associated with it, associating this time with a wizard. In other Korean legends, dolmens are referred to as houses for witches or the work of ancient saints. Though these outlandish folktales are entertaining, they do nothing to debate the origin of these structures. However, like Merlin the Magician in the UK and his association with megalithic monuments, it's instrumental to note the folklore and megalithic craze is almost identical, though thousands of miles apart. When we see ancient structures around the world, ancient lost advanced technology, and cross-cultural connections, we must question everything. Who really created the great civilizations of the world? And who were our real ancestors? What made it possible for ancient cultures such as the Inca, the Maya, and the Egyptians to suddenly appear on the timeline of history, already endowed with very advanced skills and cosmic knowledge? These questions are not adequately answered by conventional archaeology. We need to look through the eyes of the ancestors, revealing evidence that challenges the mainstream historical view. We've often been given a narrative and then told what to think about it. We never get the facts to speak for themselves. Megalithic Europe has been confined to its own borders, and each little megalithic district has been in the control of modern countries. There are some who think that the Middle East and the farthest corners of the northwestern Europe were in contact. The stone circle at Gilgal-Raphaim in Israel would fit right into the categories of stone circles and cairns of the British Isles. The Gilgal-Raphaim, also called the Rujum al-Hiri megalithic monument in northern Israel near the Sea of Galilee, contains almost 40,000 basalt rocks. Resembling a giant target from above and boasting intricate stone arrangements within, the circles range from 8 feet in height to 15 feet tall in the center. Archaeologists estimate the site was constructed as early as 3000 BCE. Though its purpose remains unknown, Israeli archaeologists have found it aligns with the summer solstice sunrise and that the location may have been used as a place to gaze at and track the stars, working like a kind of ancient calendar. On the island of Minorca in the Mediterranean Sea, megalithic monuments called taules, Catalan for tables, attract visitors far and wide. Archaeologists aren't sure what purpose the taules served, though independent researchers have shown deep astronomical significance, making an arc in the sky. The taules were constructed between 1000 and 3000 BCE, official studies reveal. However, many are already drawing attention to similar T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe. While we're talking about a possible 6,000 to 8,000 years difference in the epoch of construction, the T-shaped pillars may have an astronomical practice associated with them that gets passed on. Equally, the dolmens of Korea and those of Europe are also separated by 2 to 4 millennia. Yet the concept in mythology is passed on somehow. If we first get over the hurdle and accept transoceanic contact between ancient cultures, then we can solve some of the problems of megalithic similarities. The colossal Olmec heads are a perfect example to exhibit this point. No one would argue their indigenous features, yet we can't just say case solved either. It doesn't mean West African megalithic builders came one way, set up camp, and started a new culture. It's much more complex than that. We're talking a global, worldwide civilization made up of many cultures traversing and trading. Symbols, ideology, concepts, construction methods, styles, artifacts, materials, resource all get traded across vast distances. Today and as far back as man has existed on the planet. This only happens in a world that's connected by sea or by land or both. The Corsica megaliths are eerily like Göbekli Tepe also. This Mediterranean island exhibits bizarre features just like the Ice Age monument of Göbekli Tepe. The strange faces carved in the standing stones look remarkably close to the Urfa man. We even have the same H symbol carved into the stones. The more people look, the more connections they find. Perhaps the Göbekli Tepe builders didn't decline. They just moved on and migrated with their astronomical observations and stone technology. The connections keep coming. The Urfa man has his long fingers around the navel, as do the Göbekli Tepe T-shaped pillars. The Easter Island statues have long fingers holding the belly or focused on the navel. We find the same practice in the coastal lowlands of Guatemala. The pre-classic period, some 2,500 years ago, the statues are all drawing attention to the navel area with long fingers. This is the very early colonization phase in Central America, not Mayan, supposedly some unknown independent chiefdom in Guatemala. Whilst these specific practices and artistic styles across different cultures are huge indicators of a connection, there's no band of archaeologists traversing the museums of the world looking for them. Put it like this: every megalithic region and megalithic culture have their own individual styles, yet there are commonalities between sites that shouldn't be there. Archaeology concentrates on the individualistic, and megalithic researchers concentrate on the connections. Keystone cuts is another fantastic instrumental concept that cannot be explained by archaeology. On various continents, the practice of keystone cuts appears. Pumapunku is one place where you can visit and see them openly. Was there a megalithic technology or advanced group traversing the world, teaching knowledge, trading knowledge, or migrating from place to place? If there was a cataclysm or worldwide flood that some have suggested, it would explain the migrations. It would also explain the common origin and limited transoceanic contact. Each megalithic culture, as it moved on and isolated itself, was left to progress, flourish, or dwindle out of existence. One of the most remarkable megalithic cultures to last so long on this earth was the San Agustin culture of Colombia. So very little is known about the ancient peoples of San Agustin or their culture. They have no written language and had already disappeared several centuries before Europeans arrived in this part of the world. But their legacy is sealed regardless of how much or little we can learn about them. After all, they were responsible for building the largest group of monuments and megalithic sculptures in South America. This mystery is unlikely to be solved anytime soon. But San Agustin isn't about solving mysteries. It's about experiencing the wonders of a lost civilization. The real mystery of San Agustin lies in the identity of the skilled peoples who built these remarkable statues and burial sites. Archaeologists and anthropologists have been baffled trying to piece together some part of their story. The earliest remnants of their culture date back to 3300 BC, and these archaeological sites were abandoned around 1350 AD. They were rediscovered in the 18th and 19th centuries, and most of the burial sites were looted in search of gold. The fact remains they survived the longest of all megalithic cultures right up until medieval times. Then, like every other megalithic culture, vanished. The story of Atlantis has intrigued humanity for millennia. It's confounded all the experts. It's brought wonderment to the general public ever since the days of Plato. The fables of Plato described in detail the history and demise of the Atlantean Empire in his writings of Critias and Timaeus, circa 400 BC. If the story's real history, which many now think, when did the Atlantean Empire fall, and why have we heard so little details about this advanced civilization of the ancient world? The prehistoric of the last 100,000 years could reveal the secrets of our species' origin and light the true extent of Earth's lost global civilization. Ancient sites like Çatalhöyük and Göbekli Tepe may be pushing the boundaries of prehistory back to 10,000 BC. But let's not forget, Pumapunku and Tiwanaku are dated to this time frame also, at least in terms of archaeoastronomy and geological data. If we're to take anything from Plato's account, it's that the Atlanteans we're dealing with mapped the skies and geodetically measured the Earth. Whilst archaeology remains baffled on so many ancient sites around the globe, determined pioneering researchers have provided colossal evidence to suggest we had an advanced ancient civilization that went down in a flood. Sumerian and biblical accounts may well be true as well as Plato's account. This documentary explores the newly discovered down-to-earth findings of the most enigmatic, perplexing sites on Earth. If the Atlantean Empire was consumed by the sea, our findings should be below and above water. The remnants of this ancient civilization have left us amazing clues in the monuments they left behind, showing they must have had highly advanced, accurate mapping methods. The Atlantean Empire successfully measured and mapped the Earth, thereby allowing them the ability to navigate to locations throughout the world, representing an empire of epic proportions, literally on a global scale. It's only in the last decade that the story of Atlantis fits into real history and archaeology. Although scholars focus on the recent history of the Earth, everybody's now agreed that there was an event called the Last Ice Age, and that the last ice age came to a rather abrupt end by the fate of a comet about 12,000 years ago, resulting in the end of the Ice Age. Plato, who knew nothing about ice ages, nevertheless set that demise of Atlantis precisely at that time that the vast ice sheets that covered huge areas of the Earth were melting down and pouring their meltwater into the oceans, subsequently raising sea levels by 400 feet all around the world. Like it or not, the Plato dating is as accurate as it gets. The Mediterranean and Doggerland is also indicative that the whole Atlantic and the Mediterranean was flooded in a catastrophic event. Thus, 200 sunken ruins in the Mediterranean basin are associated often with Atlantis. So often from deep antiquity, we see ancient ruins with a very specific megalithic construction that's so distinct. You see this in these ruins that are above water, but you also see the same kind of construction in these underwater ruins. In the southern part of the Iberian Peninsula, at the mouth of the Mediterranean, the Dolmen de Menga is an awe-inspiring example. Spain and Portugal are rife with such examples. Dolmen de Menga in Antequera, Spain, has a capstone stone, which is the biggest in a prehistoric monument from all over the world. The weight of this stone is estimated 180 tons. The Great Dolmen of Zambujeiro in Évora, Portugal is another colossal example. The Dolmen de Vieira, Antequera, has an identical doorway, identical to those in Malta. The doorways are so unique, difficult to make, and always used in the same configuration, it can only be the same culture. Megalithic building with gigantic sculpted stones is considered by almost all the experts to have begun around 2500 BC, from the Great Pyramid of Giza to Stonehenge in England, from Baalbek of the ancient Canaanites to the aforementioned dolmens of southern Spain. Why the sudden building craze in 2500 BC? Almost all these ancient structures show alignments to the solstices and equinoxes with a near obsessional accuracy. It's said the base of the Nibla and Ronde in Spain is built entirely of megalithic recycled materials. The site of this bridge is situated on the river network of the ancient megalithic region, which is also situated in the richest and most ancient mining region in the world. Mining was the source of wealth for the Atlanteans, and it's long been purported the southern Iberia was their mining region. In 1755, the Great Lisbon earthquake provided an incredible window into this Atlantean region. Although this region of the world is not known for its risk of quakes and tsunamis, a devastating earthquake produced a tsunami on the southern Iberian Peninsula. When the ocean receded, the remnants of sunken cities were exposed and visible for a short while. The Lisbon earthquake and its subsequent tsunami was the greatest natural catastrophe that affected Europe in recent history, and its effects left a mark in the collective memory of the inhabitants of the Iberian coast. The greatest impact occurred in Lisbon City, with almost 900 direct victims. Many other Portuguese coastal populations were also affected, some of which were destroyed, although the number of victims was lower than in the capital city. The effects of the tsunami are also described in areas of Spain and the African Atlantic coast, as well as Cornwall and even the agitation in closed waters of faraway places like Scotland. Yet today, only 200 years later, there's only faint memories of this event and the exposed sunken cities. Spain, Gibraltar, Morocco has always been labeled as the center of the Atlantean Empire, with submerged ruins reported off Ceuta, Tarifa, Zahara de los Atunes, Cadiz, Rota, and Chipiona of Spain, and the ruins of the city of Atlantis, perhaps 30 miles south of Cadiz in 100 feet of water. Ruins too at several locations off Morocco on both sides of the Gibraltar. So why have we not seen reports about these on the news everywhere? All too often, Plato's Atlantis is being proved time and time again. Britain, Ireland, France also has many submerged ruins, with numerous examples being reported off Cornwall's Isles of Scilly, in Cardigan Bay, off Tory Island, and off the Brittany coast of the Kingdom of Wise, also known as Caris. Bizarrely, Tory Island also boasts a magical T-shaped pillar. Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Malta. Famed British nautical archaeologist Nick Fleming reported submerged ruins off Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. At Gigthis, Algeciras, Thane, Achula, Seluctum, Thapsus, Hyriacahelia, Neapolis, Moor, and Carpus. And off Slima, Malta, massive temple ruins are reported like those onshore, as Plato said that Atlantis extended inside the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar, to Libya and Italy, Tyrian Sea. How far outside he didn't say, perhaps because he had not heard about the Ice Age tin mines at Cornwall, England, nor about Bimini of the Bahamas, though he did write that there was another continent, not Asia, beyond the Western Ocean. If we wanted to focus on the special megalithic construction that's found all over the world as an identifier of this Atlantean lost civilization, let's address it as Cyclopean masonry. Cyclopean construction is giant granite or some other difficult-to-work stone boulders that have been shaped and are usually fitted together in a jigsaw pattern where the stones, are perfectly fitted and locked in together. We can find it in Spain, Greece, in Turkey, in Egypt, and in the Middle East. We can even find it in Mexico. The similarity of this unusual type of construction is direct evidence of a singular source for this construction method, and logically speaking, it can only be considered Atlantis. Atlantis was a maritime civilization which was predominantly based on coastlines, much like we do today. It was globally distributed all over the world, virtually everywhere, but it was on coastlines. The reason that so little evidence to come down to us is because those coastlines were all submerged and are now under at least 100 feet of water. Since the end of the last ice age, nobody's bothered to look there. The influence of a great lost civilization, if to be found all around the world, will be submerged. It's no surprise historians are baffled when they don't look in the right place. One of the places in which it was very active was in the Mediterranean, in the eastern side of what we now call the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlanteans were sophisticated geodetic metrologists. Any global civilization would have to be. It's not some curious byproduct or hobby of the Atlanteans. It's essential if you're to be a global culture. If you go to Egypt and you go to the Solar Boat Museum, there's a boat built for Khufu of the Great Pyramid fame circa 2500. Make no mistake, it's as advanced as anything up to and maybe even including the ships of the 1800s. This boat was ocean-going and could go anywhere, and if people had knowledge of the astronomy which we know the megalithic architects had, you'd master the globe. An 8,000-year-old wooden platform has been discovered on the seabed off the Isle of Wight in the UK, provoking curious insights into how far back maritime culture goes. We may well have been not only all over the globe, but all over the globe in the profound epochs. According to the ancient Aztec legends, the original homeland of the Aztecs was a mysterious and lost land called Atlan. And the word Atlan is in fact part of the word Atlantis. So the idea too that the Aztecs' mysterious homeland that they left was somehow in Spain off the coast of the Basque region somewhere. The ancient Basque people being a maritime culture too. The Aztec and Mayan temples of Mesoamerica are built, let's say, mostly 900 AD. But they often dig down deeper and deeper, and they find nearly every time it all goes back to 2000 to 3000 BC. The most ancient structures of Central America from the ancient Olmecs and the pre-Mayans are all from 2 to 3000 BC. Megalithic, Cyclopean ruins. In the Basque country of Spain, amazingly the people not only claim a lineage from the Atlanteans, but also refer to their lost kingdom as Atlantica. It's interesting along those lines that the Basque language, which is very unique, is also a very similar language to the Aztec language, known as the Nahuatl language. The Basque language and the Aztec language have a very curious combination of X sounds and TL sounds. When compared, we find a lot of curious similarities. Many have speculated the original homeland of the Aztecs, called Atlan, is the same homeland the Basques originated from. For those not familiar with the mysteries surrounding the Basque people, there are several aspects that puzzle historians, linguists, and academics. Essentially, they have extremely unique genetic markers, the rarest blood type on the planet, but highly concentrated in their population. They have a language isolate, essentially being unlike any other on Earth. The origins of the Basque language, and thus the Basque people, is perplexing for many reasons. It's as if they were dropped into the border regions of Spain and France on the edge of the Atlantic. When independent researchers and linguists have looked for the origins of the Basque language, there are surprising, baffling results. Another bizarre group of people with a similar background, unique genetic markers, and a language isolate exists on an island in the north of Japan. The Basque and Ainu correlation seems obvious when looked at from a linguistic approach. However, each group of people are considered language isolates and independent from each other based on linguists not liking the geographic locations being so far. It seems evidence is irrelevant if you don't like how it fits. Here are a few obvious examples of the striking linguistics. Amazingly, the Ainu are thought to be descended from the Jomon people, and having once flourished on all the islands of Japan, and now only survive on the northernmost island in dwindling numbers. They're often reported to have Caucasian features, and usually reside within their own group, just like the Basque people. Amazingly, the Jomon Ainu are scientifically dated through a variety of methods, predominantly pottery and other archaeology, to be a possible 14,000 years old, right up until the Ice Age. Archaeologists determined that the Ainu have been living on many of Japan's islands, from Okinawa to Sakhalin, for a guaranteed 7,000 years as a minimum. Their Jomon pottery is found everywhere. It's characteristic, although somewhat clumsy, and can be dated from 5000 BCE until just before the Christian era. It's very attractive and is distinguished by fantasy of its shapes with elegant and imaginative cord decorations. Some of the most striking finds were the clearly anthropomorphic clay and stone figurines resembling pregnant females with mask-like faces and protuberant eyes, very similar to those found in many other parts of the world, especially in Europe. Even in mainstream archaeology, the Jomon and their artifacts are often compared to pre-Columbian cultures of the North American Pacific Northwest, and especially to the Valdivia culture in Ecuador, because in these settings, cultural complexity developed within a primarily hunting-gathering context, with limited use of horticulture. Stephen Oppenheimer, a medical geneticist at Oxford University, claims that the origins of the majority of British and Irish people lie in the Basques, who he maintains moved north from Spain thousands of years ago following the retreat of the glaciers that have been covering northern Europe. Oppenheimer spent 2 years researching the genetic makeup of people in the British Isles by tracing individual male gene lines and analyzing their geographical distribution. This would certainly explain the Neolithic constructions we see from the Mediterranean to the British Isles and along coastal Western Europe. And according to his findings, 3/4 of British people's ancestors arrived as hunter-gatherers between 7,500 and 15,000 years ago, after the melting of the ice caps, but before the land broke away from the mainland and divided into islands. The first settlers were unlikely to have spoken a Celtic language, but possibly a tongue related to the unique Basque language, explains Oppenheimer in his book, The Origins of the British, a genetic detective story. His findings contradict the long-held theory that Celts and Anglo-Saxons are the principal ancestors of today's British and Irish populations. Neither of those groups, says Oppenheimer, had much more impact than the Vikings, the Normans, or even immigrants of the past 50 years. That is to say, around 5% of the British Isles gene pool. Based on the overall genetic perspectives of the British, it seems that Celts, Belgians, Angles, Jutes, Saxons, Vikings, and Normans were all immigrant minorities compared with the first unnamed Basque pioneers who first ventured into the empty, chilly lands so recently vacated by the great ice sheets, writes Oppenheimer. The whole enigma of the Basque and their lineage to Atlantis is truly amazing. For a small pocket of people sandwiched between North Spain and southern France, they're supposed to be isolated. However, they're connected to so many groups: the aforementioned Scots, Irish, British, the Ainu of Japan, the Aztecs, and the Berbers of northern Africa, genetically and partially linguistically, which should come as no surprise as it's an Atlantean territory. Many have claimed links to the mysterious Etruscans and the Sumerians. The whole point of discussing this fascinating, baffling picture is that this is exactly what we should expect to find if we had the remnants of a worldwide Atlantean advanced culture. We have monuments and structures, linguistics and genetics, and roots going back to deep antiquity on all counts. A number of stone circles have also been found, similar to those in Cornwall, England, and Senegal, Northwest Africa. A few still have the slender upright stone in the center, also found in the British Isles and elsewhere in Atlantic Europe and Northwest Africa. Around 300 BCE, Mongolian-type people moved in from Korea and aggressively forced the Ainu north into the large island of Hokkaido, where an estimated 17,000 of them are still living. Some 10 dialects have been recognized, such as those of Sakhalin, Hokkaido, and the Kurils, but several are at the point of being lost forever. In Hokkaido, young Ainu are now making an effort to restore their ancient language and traditions. There are many intriguing resemblances between the religious customs of the Ainu and the Shinto Japanese. The Ainu called their god Kami, while the Japanese called him Kami-sama. The Aleut and Eskimo word kami means ancient thing or at the beginning. One of the great many correlations between Ainu and Inuktitut, the Eskimo people call themselves the Inuit. Note the similarity between Inuk and Ainu. Bear worship is still part of the Ainu religion and is described in detail by Joseph Campbell in Primitive Mythology. Could it be that the Ainu were part of the mass migration of Caucasian type sea peoples who fled the burning Sahara, and among others became the Caucasian-looking Polynesians and Maoris? The following language comparison for the Ainu seems to indicate that this was the case. In books about Japan, it's often remarked that many of the names of Japan's geographical features were taken over from the Ainu. For instance, the many names beginning or ending with Ama, goddess, are all thought to be of Ainu origin. In 1994, the newly married Prince and Princess of Japan traveled to the cave of the goddess Amaterasu to ask her blessings for their marriage. The name Amaterasu is agglutinated from Ama, Atera, Asu. Ama, goddess; Atera, to come out, to appear; Asturu, blessings flow. Blessings flow when the goddess appears. This name is made up of perfect Basque. Other well-known names are similarly assembled, such as Hokkaido, Oka Aidu, Oka, big meal; Aiduru, looking forward to. Looking forward to a big meal. And Fujiyama, Fa Uji Ama. Fa, happy; Uju, cry of joy; Ama, goddess. A happy cry of joy for the goddess is uttered by everyone who reaches the top of the holy mountain, just like it's still being heard on many other mountains of the world. For example, at Croagh Patrick in Ireland on the last Sunday of July. The Basques even have a word for this yodel cry of the goddess, which they call Arinsi. The name Amaterasu is made up with the vowel interlocking Ogam formula, which was surprising to me because in the Ainu language itself there's not a hint of this agglutinating formula. Nylund then searched for more Japanese names and words which are assembled with the vowel interlocking Ogam formula and found many, such as kamikaze and samurai. The surprise which came from this comparison was that those words which showed vowel interlocking were usually associated with fighting and male domination. This appeared to be true all over the Pacific, including Peru and Mexico. Could this mean that there were two major migrations? The first one many millennia ago from Mesopotamia, which brought the peaceful people of the goddess to the Pacific, and a much later one, missionary-based, bringing aggressive male domination and the language-distorting vowel-consonant-vowel (VCV) formula to these same areas. None of the Ainu words was the same as in Basque, but many were extremely close, such as ikoro and koro, money; kokor and gogor, to scold; tasum and iratasun, illness; iska and ziska, to steal. From the following comparisons, it seems clear that Ainu and Basque are genetically related. In comparing Ainu with Dravidian, there is no such relationship, although Dravidian itself is obviously also related to Basque. Two separate branches of the same tree? There are indications that the Ainu sailed regularly to Alaska to obtain reindeer hides from the Aleuts established there, which they needed for their sails, exactly the same as was done by the Basques, the Irish and Scots, who went to the Arctic Norway for their reindeer leather sails, Mount Komsa people. The Ainu must have been great long-distance seafarers to keep up contact with their home base that they may have been in Mesopotamia. All over the Pacific, this incredible sailing tradition waned fast when the social structure changed after the coming of European or Asiatic domination. Today, the Ainu still sail the ocean, but mostly to fish. The complex navigational techniques acquired over millennia had been the property of a few special families and were never popular wisdom. They're now lost. The astonishing amount of astronomical knowledge which the members of such navigator families had to memorize was taught them at a very young age and was built up during a lifetime on the ocean. To these highly skilled and proud people, the Pacific was not hostile. The ocean was their life and joy, and an indispensable part of their culture. Only in the Carolines, the ancient spirit, some of the secret navigational techniques, and much astronomical wisdom has been maintained to this day. All this is described in a book called We the Navigators by David Lewis. The people who sailed the Pacific without the aid of instruments have recently been called the Nomads of the Wind, a most appropriate title for these courageous and resourceful people. The Ainu appeared to have been the avant-garde of the Pacific migration. The desertification of the Sahara, see climate, had probably forced these groups to flee that region. It was then that the name Africa was coined. Af-ri-ika, Afar-ari-ika. Afa, happy, Aranari, Aman, to escape, Ikara, terror. Happy to have escaped the terror. Some of these displaced tribes sailed around Asia and started to populate the nearest Pacific islands, all of them speaking the same universal language and bringing along the same religion. Many of the Pacific islands had names which could be translated with the Basque dictionary, such as Tahiti, from Tahi-iti, Tahi-yui, appearance, iti, ox, resembles an ox. The sharp-pointed mountains indeed resemble ox horns. Also, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, Ara Apa Nui, Ara Apa Nui, Araldoi, giant. Aparta, far, far away, Nui, enormous in Hawaiian. Enormous giants, far, far away. Hawaii, Ha-u-ahi. Ha-u, this one. Ahi-gari, exhausting. This one is exhausting. It still is. Finally, Papua, a Papua living in poverty. Stone Age people don't own much. They don't pollute and they live as part of nature. One tantalizing hint comes from Peru, where the patriarchal Incas established a complex civilization, complete with highly evolved Sumerian-type irrigation. The Incas were living gods, and the Basque word for god is Aincoa. Ancient navigation allowed the surprisingly accurate geodetic mapping of many parts of the world in ancient times, even during the Ice Age, and very interestingly, there's a whole category of maps produced between the 15th and the 17th century based on lost sources, which show the world with astonishing accuracy as it looked during the last Ice Age. Perhaps a sunken landmass was exactly where Kircher's map says it was, directly in the center of the Atlantic Ocean. There's a geological feature running through the Atlantic called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is essentially a crack in the earth. There's huge volcanic activity exactly where the island volcano of Atlantis was purported to have sunk beneath the waves. We know the Egyptians had measured the earth because the understanding of those measurements is what gives rise to the ancient measuring systems of cubits. The cubit is the measurement that's expressed in the Great Pyramid. There's no doubt whatsoever that the Great Pyramid of Egypt does embody the dimensions of the earth. If you take the measurement of the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, go along and measure each of its four sides and add that together, then you multiply that number, 43,200, you'll get a very accurate rendition of the equatorial circumference of the Earth to within a few miles of the value that we have today. If you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by the same 43,200, you'll get a very accurate rendition of the polar radius of the Earth. It's essentially a scale model at a ratio of 42,200 to 1. It's beyond remarkable, some say completely baffling, that the Earth and night sky were viewed as a sphere within a sphere by several ancient civilizations. In the ancient book of the Popol Vuh, it's written that the ancients could measure the round face of the Earth and the arc of the sky. Even Plato referred to the Earth as a sphere within the celestial sphere. As a result of the slow wobble over the Earth's axis, The sphere of the night sky appears to move at a constant rate of 72 years per 1 degree, known as precession. The Atlanteans' master geodetic masons were able to predict where on Earth the constellations of the night sky would appear at the same position relative to the horizon. With this knowledge, the ancients related time to distance, the same principle upon which is based our modern nautical mile system, with arc minutes and arc seconds, and the notion or the knowledge of precession of the equinoxes. Why the ancients knew of precession of the equinoxes so far back then, and thus write it into their legends and mythologies, is stifling. Precession of the equinoxes, also known as lunisolar precession, is the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun on the Earth's equator, causing a wobble. They created what was known as the Great Year, which is in many ancient cultures 25,920 years is approximately one wheel or orbit of the precession, and that they broke them down into 12 constituent parts, and these 12 became the zodiac signs, with each of those as 2,160 years. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which has baffled the experts until now, is being considered the ancient prime meridian. The Great Pyramid of Giza has proven structural measurements of an almost perfect reduction of the dimensions of the Earth by a factor of 43,200 already outlined. But this Great Pyramid ratio is directly related to the precession of the equinox. Both 43,200 and a precessional cycle of 25,920 are exactly divisible by one zodiac age of 2,160 years. What's going on here? Clearly, the Egyptologists are missing a trick. Precessional numbers come up everywhere, not just the Great Pyramid. So many distinct cultures and civilizations from different parts of the world integrated precessional numbers, such as 12, 36, 54, 72, 108, and 432, into their respective ancient legends and architectures, including the scopes of their knowledge and understanding of the Earth and astronomy. The Hindus, the Chinese, the Sumerians, and Mesoamericans all had accurate and very advanced measuring systems based upon knowledge of the dimensions of the Earth. There's a lot of mystery projected about precession and advanced mathematics, base 60 in particular. It's very simple. Precession is based on observation, albeit an advanced and sophisticated science process to observe accurately. But if you observe, you'll find precession is 25,920 years. One solar year is a specific determined length of time, and it takes 25,920 of these solar years to complete one cycle. The number 25,920 is directly linked to the Earth by a wobble, and this number is exactly divisible by 60. Therefore, the Sumerians used a base 60 system. Therefore, it still survives in part today. Therefore, the scale model for the pyramids, 43,200, was chosen because it's exactly divisible by 60. If precession was 50,000 years, we would probably have a base 50 system, but we don't. The ancient used precession and time and relative distance to traverse the globe, measuring circumferences, angles. It didn't matter to them how many years was in a precession, only that they could measure it. It was ingenious, but also precession was a large number, clumsy if you didn't break it up, and 60 was a great number to use to break it up. That's how simple the theory was. In practice, it was sophisticated and advanced. They measured arc minutes and arc seconds. Relating the information, they had their own way of doing longitude. Our Western world cracked longitude in the 1800s with clocks that were seagoing. The ancients did it much more elegantly with the great clock of precession. You didn't have to wind it up, carry it, or look hard for it. It was always there above you. The world contains many mysteries that make many scratch their heads in wonderment as to how it was done in a more primitive era, when according to the history books, only soft metal tools were available. Some of these ancient technological wonders can't be duplicated even today, and others that are way ahead of their time. Is there some form of advanced ancient technology waiting to be rediscovered today?
Here we have another astonishing archaeological site in the Andes Mountains that questions the conventional history of mankind. Sacsayhuaman, the formidable so-called fortress that looks out across the city of Cusco. First and foremost, the enigmatic construction is a masterpiece of engineering. Modern-day experts cannot explain how it was built. Sacsayhuaman is a marvel of mathematics, philosophy, and advanced engineering. Huge stones, most of which weigh as much as 100 tons, have been laid out in a zigzag formation. Like all Inca stonework, there's still debate surrounding how they were constructed. Thanks to a yet unexplained precision in stone cutting, the structure is built in such a way that a single piece of paper will not fit between two stones. This precision, combined with the rounded corners of the limestone blocks, the variety of their interlocking shapes, and the way the walls lean inward, ubiquitous in Inca architecture, is thought to increase the ruins' incredible durability. Devastating earthquakes in Cusco have left it undamaged. Experts today can't agree exactly how the ancients were able to accomplish this feat of engineering. Some have cited advanced technology. Others think it was done through a vast network of mirrors and lenses to concentrate sunlight. The only thing anyone can agree on is how impressive it is. The purpose of the megalithic wall of Sacsayhuaman is not the only mystery left to us by the ancient architects. The construction technology remains to be a mystery as well. It's just 50 years ago that the modern science, due to the input of the American researchers, adopted the thesis that all the known masonry techniques at the Inca monuments pertain to Incas. Although earlier, many of the researchers believed that the Cyclopean stone constructions must have been erected by a highly developed ancient culture which existed there long before the accession of Inca. It's also worth noting, having conquered Cusco in 1534, the Spanish conquistadors have enthroned Manco Inca Yupanqui, the son of the last great Inca, Huayna Capac. However, it's already in 1536 that Manco Inca raised a revolt against the Spanish conquistadors. In May of that year, a huge army of Inca, as of the chronicler's data, it counted between 100 and 200,000 people, put Cusco under siege. The Indians took possession of the Sacsayhuaman Hill and from its top began to bombard the city, where the Spaniards have settled, with the fire shells. So that to avoid a disastrous defeat, the conquistadors attempted with a counterattack of the hill on the day they succeeded and seized it. They managed to win due to application of the assault ladder during a night raid, and there's nothing unexpected or unusual in such a result of the fight. Because for the soldiers who have already had an experience in assaulting the European castles, there was no problem with conquering the 5 to 6 meter walls of Sacsayhuaman. In other words, this sole episode of the military action in Sacsayhuaman evidently demonstrates that this grandiose construction has never been a fortress. From a technological point of view, the Great Pyramid was made using more advanced technology than that of today's engineering machines. For example, a piece of Khafre's lower temple stone next to Sphinx weighs about 200 tons. It's said that there are only 2 cranes which can carry the weight of 200 tons in the United States, but a few hundred of 200-ton class stones were used in this lower temple. The chief of the crane that lifted a 200-ton boiler in Long Island, New York, said the following about the block stones of the lower temple. I'm looking at what you're showing me here and looking at the distances involved. I don't know if we'd be able to pick the 200-ton blocks from the positions that I see available to us. In my business, we pick heavy loads and we look to see how heavy loads were picked up by other people before us. And seeing how they moved these heavy blocks, 200-ton blocks, thousands and thousands of years ago, I've no idea how they did this job. It's a mystery, and it'll probably always be a mystery to me, and maybe to everybody. It seems to be very hard, even with modern science, to lift 200-ton objects. But there is a piece of stone as heavy as 490 tons among the block stones used for the pyramids. The heaviest weight that the crawler transporter that was used to transport the Saturn rocket at a U.S. space base can transport is 500 tons. A technician at Obayashi Corporation, a Japanese general contractor, said the following: "The task of lifting and putting down a huge 490-ton stone is practically impossible, even for a modern giant crane operation specialist. In addition, the stones around the top of the Great Pyramid are the biggest, making it obvious that the Great Pyramid could not have been built with today's technology." Graham Hancock said the following: This, it must be conceded, is not just atomic clock accuracy, but the Rolex, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Rolls-Royce, and IBM of building engineering all rolled into one. There are many scientific investigations of Giza's pyramids. In addition to science, archaeology is always making progress as well. The imaginative theory that tens of thousands of slaves built the pyramids using manpower is becoming unreliable. Recently, many technicians and archaeologists have pointed out that the pyramids were an energy-generating system. While Chris Dunn, a former high-tech engineer of the space aeronautics industry, investigated the complicated and geometric structure of the inside of the Great Pyramid and was convinced that it was the husk of a gargantuan mechanical device from which the most important inner structural parts had been detached for some reason. It was built with an abundance of cut stones, 2.3 million pieces, weighing 5.8 million tons, using higher technology than that now used in the newest high-rise buildings, because constructors wanted a large enough reward, that is, an enormous supply of electrical power. Chris Dunn supposed that the Great Pyramid amplified and changed sound waves, vibration wave, that came from inside the earth into electric power. Pumapunku is perhaps one of the most incredible ancient sites on planet Earth that display the incredible stone masonry skills of its mysterious builders. Pumapunku means the door of the Puma in the native Aymara language. The precision stone masonry found at Pumapunku is both incredibly mysterious and beautiful. But most interestingly, this ancient archaeological site has features that engineers and architects would have a tough time replicating today. Pumapunku, just like other incredible ancient archaeological sites, defies ancient mankind's possibilities thousands of years ago. Is it possible that ancient inhabitants of Peru, Bolivia, and Egypt had advanced knowledge and technology that allowed them to erect some of the most incredible ancient sites on the planet? Or is it possible that incredible ancient sites like Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, the pyramids of Giza, and Teotihuacan in Mexico were all built with the use of stone tools and without the wheel? What if ancient mankind used other technologies that are completely unknown to our society today? It's very interesting to know that the andesite blocks located at Pumapunku range from varied sizes. Some of them have up to 7 meters in height. As for the weight, some of the blocks found at Pumapunku exceed 100 tons. So you must ask yourself, how is it possible that ancient man was able to cut, quarry, transport, and put these incredible blocks of stone into place thousands of years ago? The precision found at Pumapunku is what baffles most of the visitors. The 90-degree carved blocks of stone are fascinating feats of masonry, smooth surfaces that were impossible to replicate using stone tools and copper. Some of the andesite blocks at Pumapunku even have perforation dots. Some researchers believe these perforation marks are in fact marks left by highly advanced tools that were used for carving and extraction process. Pumapunku is without a doubt one of the most mysterious places on this planet, and it's located near Tiwanaku, less than a quarter mile northeast of Pumapunku. Scientists believe Tiwanaku was once the center of a civilization with more than 40,000 inhabitants. Tiwanaku was probably the greatest Native American civilization that many people haven't heard of. Pumapunku is, simply put, one of those places where, when you look at these incredible constructions, manipulated with that much perfection, your imagination just fires up. There are so many possibilities at this point, and conventional archaeological explanation just don't fit in one's logic at that point. It's nearly impossible to think that ancient man was able to do all this at a time when history tells us humans were extremely primitive beings. Ancient mankind must have had some sort of mysterious ancient technology that's been lost, together with the great civilization that built this incredible archaeological site. We believe that Pumapunku is another ancient site displaying evidence of advanced ancient technology. Ollantaytambo is not only one of the most impressive places in South America, but it's one of the most impressive places in the world. This ancient Inca city is enveloped in a mystery that experts can't explain. Its megalithic constructions have an inexplicable perfection, in some strange way molded to perfection and stacked in the walls, without need of any kind of glue, as if they'd taken their shape in a 3D printer. This complex is located 3,000 meters high in the middle of the sacred valley of the Incas, and is one of the most important Inca sites in Peru. Ollantaytambo is, for sure, one of the most impressive megalithic sites in South America. Granite blocks of up to 80 tons, perfectly carved, form the walls of their constructions, but many of these stones were extracted directly from the mountainside, on the other side of the valley. Its incredible stone constructions are not the only thing amazing about this place, because if you didn't know, Ollantaytambo is aligned with other important ancient constructions around the world. The pyramids of Giza, Paratoya, Nazca Lines, or the statues of the Easter Islands are just a few of them. The incredible structures of Ollantaytambo suggest to many experts the possibility that the people who built it knew ancient technology lost at some point in time, perhaps even before the Inca civilization. They knew something that allowed them to shape the stones with incredible precision, perhaps the same advanced technology that shaped the stone spheres of Costa Rica or the Moai statues of the Easter Islands in Chile. One of the great mysteries of Ollantaytambo is why the Temple of the Sun was never completed. The Temple of the Sun is one of the most amazing constructions that you can see in Ollantaytambo. It consists of 6 monoliths, each made of stones of tens of tons, so the builders had no problem with the weight. But then, why did they never get to finish this project? It's not only its alignment with other incredible constructions on Earth that makes this place so out of place, but the incredible precision with which these stones were carved. Some of the corners fit so perfectly that they had puzzled archaeologists all over the world. Many scholars agree that a work of such magnitude can only be made with quartz, carbon, hardened or cobalt glass. However, the Incas did not know these materials because until today no tools of this type have been found in Ollantaytambo. The complexity of Ollantaytambo coincides with places like Tiahuanaco, Pumapunku, or the Great Pyramid of Giza, 2570 BC. But these places are separated not only by thousands of kilometers, but also for thousands of years in the history of time. The only thing that can be said about Ollantaytambo at this moment is that it's an ancient wonder. It has buildings as impressive as any wonder of the world. About Baalbek's enormous blocks, I believe these huge megaliths long predate the construction of the Temple of Jupiter and are likely to be 12,000 or more years old, contemporaneous with the megalithic site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. I suggest we're looking at the handiwork of the survivors of a lost civilization, that the Romans built their Temple of Jupiter on a pre-existing megalithic foundation, and that they were unaware of the giant hewn megaliths in the ancient quarry as they were covered by sediment in Roman times, as indeed the newly discovered block still was until very recently. The temple is one of the largest stone structures in the world. Some 26 feet above the structure's base are found 3 of the largest stones ever employed by man. Each of these stones measures 10 feet thick, 13 feet high, and is over 60 feet long. Knowing the density of limestone permits weight estimates of over 1.2 million pounds. Some people with impressive engineering skills cut, dressed, and moved these immense stone blocks from a quarry 3/4 of a mile away. A walk to this quarry introduces the observer to the monolith, an even larger block of limestone, 13 feet 5 inches, 15 feet 6 inches, and 69 feet 11 inches. The monolith weighs in at over 2 million pounds. In comparison, the largest stones used in the Great Pyramid tip the scales at only 400,000 pounds. Forget the ancient airplanes, the ancient helicopters, the world maps. This alone should set the standard primitive man to advanced man and then to civilization scientific dogma on its ear. There's no way that this stone can be explained by the science and history they teach us in school. No technology existing today could move this stone, much less transport it from where it was quarried. The pre-existing stone foundation upon which the Romans built their temple at this site is half-mile long on one side. No one knows who built it. There are no historical records, although the local folks think it's a pre-flood city originally built by Cain after his banishment. In his 1860 diary, Scottish traveler David Urquhart wrote that he found the giant stones so enormous as to shut out every other thought, and yet to fill the mind with only trouble. The stones are unnecessarily large. Why would anyone cut and move them to build a platform unless they had the technology to do that easily? You don't spend the resources of a kingdom to build a platform. Today's cranes could elevate such stones, but they couldn't move them. In theory, you could design crawler cranes that would allow to elevate and transport the stones, but for the purpose, you'd also need to build a special road with perfectly smooth surface. What if this ancient site was built by an ancient civilization that had in their possession advanced technology? Technology that's now lost, a technology that even possibly helped create many other megalithic sites across the world. Are these ancient energy towers located high up in Silustani, Peru? The official version of Silustani is that it's a pre-Incan cemetery on the shores of Lake Umayo near Puno in Peru. The tombs, which are built above ground in tower-like structures called chulpas, are the vestiges of the Kula people, who are Aymara conquered by the Inca Empire in the 15th century. Many of the chulpas at Silustani show pre-Inca characteristics that were later redressed with Inca stone blocks. Similar chulpas are found throughout the entire south-central Andes, with the above-ground burial styles going back at least to the mature Tiwanaku period, circa 500 to 950. The insides of the tombs were built to hold entire groups of people, most likely extended families of the Aymara elite. Corpses were not intentionally mummified, but in the dry environment created by the closed tomb, they survived for centuries. Most mummy bundles indicate burial in a fetal position. Some of the tombs also have various animal shapes carved into the stone. The only openings to the buildings face east, which is where the sun was reborn by Mother Earth each day. The architecture of the site is often considered more complex than typical Incan architecture. In contrast with the Inca, who used stones in varying shapes, the Kola used even rectangle edges. While chulpas are not unique to Silustani and are found across the Altiplano, this site is considered the best and most preserved example of them. These findings are disputed by researcher Bren Forster, stating clearly this work was beyond the capability of the Bronze Age Inca. So who made them and when? The towers are constructed with tight-fitting stone with no mortar or cement, like what we see at Pumapunku and many other sites in South America where advanced technology is evident. After discovering energy lines running through the towers, Forster postulates that these could be high-altitude energy devices, but the purpose of these energy towers remains a mystery for now. In India, another baffling architectural marvel, the Kailasa Temple in Ellora, Maharashtra. The world-famous temple is one of the 34 rock-cut temples that form the Ellora Caves. Why is it thought to have been built using alien technology? The answer is simple. Historians find it impossible to believe that such an architectural marvel was created entirely by ancient human beings. The Kailasa Temple is the only temple in the world to have been completely carved out from a hill. It's for this reason that it's called a single-stone megalith. Dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva, the entire temple, archaeologists believe, was built using a technique that's not been seen anywhere else in the world. The technique used demanded massive quantities of rock be carved out to create the structure. About 44,000 tons of rock was carved out to create this temple. This would easily take centuries of labor. However, the entire temple is said to have been built in 18 years. That too using simple tools such as chisels and hammers. The feat was achieved with a civilization which, as per meager archaeological findings, had limited technology and engineering knowledge. A unique aspect of the temple is its advanced design. Systems like rainwater harvesting were thought of and built into the design of the temple, something that, centuries later, we still have a problem implementing well. The temple also has an impeccable drainage system. Apart from this, there are bridges that connect different areas, peepholes to see people coming up, and giant balconies built into the structure. This means that everything to the tiniest detail had to be planned, as it had to be carved out from the rock. Although widely believed to be built during the reign of Rashtrakuta King Krishna I during the 8th century, there's almost no recorded information about either its construction or its architects. This again roused the curiosity of alien theorists and archaeologists, leading them to believe that the temple was indeed built using some form of advanced technology. The temple is also perfectly aligned with the four directions. A Google Earth image of the temple shows us that the structure is a rectangle whose entrance is perfectly aligned with the west. The temple is also one of the only rock caves that can be seen from the air. The roof of the temple has a huge circular design with 4 lions that look like an X from the sky. There exist several wacky theories which claim that this circle was built to signal extraterrestrial life. If all this is true and our ancestors did communicate with aliens, then there's always hope that sometime in the future we'll get to experience the same. It's truly mind-boggling to imagine what might have come out of that interaction, isn't it? The technologies of ancient civilizations continue to baffle scientific explanation. Like the pyramids and other megalithic monuments, building Nan Madol required a tremendous effort and expertise so that the substantial number of stones, weighing anywhere from 5 to 50 tons, could be moved and raised to where they were needed. To erect walls 10 feet wide and up to 37 feet tall, 250 million pieces of rock, 700,000 metric tons, had to be logged in from the quarry on the opposite side of the island. The locals say that the ancient builders used magic. A powerful magician living in the well-inhabited region on the northwest of the island was solicited with sounds of varying pitch. He made basalt logs fly through the air like birds and settle down in their appointed places. The scientific theory about lugging the stones by water on bamboo rafts does not hold water. While making a documentary movie about Nan Madol for the Discovery Channel in 1995, all attempts to transport panels weighing over 1 ton failed. This cornerstone Nandowas is believed to weigh up to 60 tons. The peculiar location of the city raises another question. Why was it raised in the ocean waters and not on land? Each structure had to be built on a specially constructed artificial rectangle in the waters. Edged by long basalt boulders and filled with coral granules, 92 such artificial islets cover the area. Why did the early constructors come up with this impractical idea with the demanding labor of building artificial sea islands when there were so many natural coral reef islands there, when they could have simply cleared the shore of palm trees? Why would someone build a city on coral reefs that rises only 5 feet above water? Nan Madol had no food or water available on the island. One must go inland to gather water and grow food. For the Sautelurs, they were the supreme rulers. The people had to bring them what they needed. When the Sautelurs were overthrown and the period of Nanamuarkes began, the Nanamuarkes lived at Nan Madol, but they had to gather their water and grow their food themselves, causing them to eventually abandon Nan Madol. The materialists contend that the island inhabitants constructed the city using massive manpower, rafts, ropes, and rollers. They can't prove this because numerous attempts to reproduce such efforts have failed. Nevertheless, like similar theories about the building of the Great Pyramids or Stonehenge, which also cannot be recreated, the theories are still touted as truth because, after all, there's no other explanation allowable in the scientist mythology. Physics, math, and engineering don't support the materialists as usual. These still existing structures have been calculated to measure 750,000 metric tons. If the total population of 35,000 were used 24/7, 365, which would preclude any other activities like getting food, shelter, and raising children, they might have been able to move 2,000 tons in a year, an optimistic assessment. At such a rate, it would have required 3 centuries to complete Nan Madol. So what was the real purpose of Nan Madol? And how did they make this place with primitive tools? These questions have puzzled scientists for centuries. This great archaeological complex is in the district of Pisac province of Chalca, 33 kilometers east of the city of Cusco. There's a strange coincidence between the distances that unite Pisac, Cusco, and Picalacta. The distance between Cusco and Pisac is 30 kilometers, and it's the same distance between Pisac and Picalacta, and also 30 kilometers from Cusco to Picalacta. When one joins the 3 cities along a straight line, one forms an equilateral triangle. This has sparked a great deal of speculation about why they would do this and if the Inca were responsible for this incredible architectural genius. The beauty of its walls, which are made of huge blocks of polished stone with extraordinary symmetry and a unique mastery of stone, leaves the visitor puzzled. In many parts of this complex, there's evidence of advanced ancient technology. The Incas could not have shaped these stones with soft bronze tools. On the shores of the Vilcamayu, the god-sacred river that runs through carved stone streams to curb its fury, one can see the light and shadowy lines of the Pisac Terraces, the great city of doves, a city of legend that was built on top of a blue rock, almost in air to see more of the most beautiful Cusco valleys, wrote Peruvian historian Alfonsini Barrionuevo of this ancient Inca city. Pisac is formed by a group of homes, aqueduct, roads, bridges, a cemetery, walls, and great terracing. When Antonio Raimondi, the Italian naturalist and geographer, visited Pisac, he was astonished by the beauty of its walls and wrote the following: "What we must admire most in Pisac is the fine carving and the perfect union of the rocks that are so well assembled that one can hardly see very fine, straight, circled, or crooked lines, as to demonstrate the difficulty of the cut and the wittiness of the execution. From distance to distance, one can see doors, streets, stairs, towers, quarters, and living quarters. Suspended in the highest peaks and where the imagination of the most daring constructor would barely dare to raise a building." There are no precise facts about the first settlement in this area, but there's no doubt that Tiahuanacos, Waris, and other cultures had a major cultural influence on the southeastern. It's assumed that the entire area, which later was occupied by Pisac, was already settled around the 10th and 11th centuries when the Inca boom began, since it has fertile and productive lands that had to be occupied by one of the groups that originated in the area. Many researchers are starting to consider whether a more advanced ancient civilization was responsible for parts of this incredible complex. As with most ancient sites in Peru, the rough stone and clay mortar Inca construction was built on top of and around a much older and superior megalithic construction made of extremely hard granite and andesite. Who were these megalithic master masons? Another perplexing site is what we call the Serapeum at Saqqara, containing massive granite boxes which many academics believe were created during dynastic times. However, the boxes in the Serapeum are examples of what engineers such as Chris Dunn have major problems with regards the conventional Egyptologist explanations. According to the latter, in the 13th century BC, Camwaset ordered that a tunnel be excavated through the solid limestone bedrock, with side chambers designed to contain large granite sarcophagi weighing at least 70 tons each to hold the mummified remains of prize Apis bulls. Manufacturer Chris Dunn is a man who knows what precision surfaces look like, and he's been involved in making complex metal parts for the aviation industry for decades. He studied the boxes at the Serapeum many times and has been able to measure the flatness of their granite and limestone surfaces using precise gauges. Their characteristics show that their creators used the same tools and were blessed with the same skill and knowledge as those who created Khafre's pyramid. Moreover, the boxes in both locations are evidence of a much higher purpose than mere burial sarcophagi. They're finished to a high accuracy. Their corners are remarkably square, and their inside corners work down to a dimension that is sharper than what one would expect to find in an artifact from prehistory. All these features are extremely difficult to accomplish and none of them necessary for a mere burial box. The manufacturers of these boxes in the Serapeum not only created inside surfaces that were flat when measured vertically and horizontally, they also made sure that the surfaces they were creating were square and parallel to each other, with one surface, the top, having sides that are 5 feet and 10 feet apart from each other. But without such parallelism and squareness on the top surface, the squareness noted on both sides would not exist. While it may be argued that modern man cannot impose a modern perspective on artifacts that are thousands of years old, an appreciation of the level of precision found in these artifacts is lacking in archaeological literature and is only revealed by an understanding of what it takes to produce this kind of work. The accomplishment in prehistory deserves more recognition. Nobody does this kind of work unless there's a very high purpose for the artifact. Even the concept of this kind of precision does not occur to an artisan unless there's no other means of accomplishing what the artifact is intended to do. The only other reason that such precision would be created in an object would be that the tools that are used to create it are so precise that they're incapable of producing anything less than precision. With either scenario, we're looking at a higher civilization in prehistory than what is currently accepted. Clearly, the techniques used to produce these features has been lost to modern science, yet it's good evidence that an advanced ancient civilization existed worldwide on this planet.